Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 5 disturbing true graveyard horror stories from California, we step through the rusted gates of cemeteries where names are carved in stone, flowers wither overnight, and the earth itself remembers what we try to forget. These are chilling accounts of bells that toll without wind, whispers leaking from cracked mausoleums, and footsteps echoing across gravel paths when you know you are utterly alone. This is a new channel, and my goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers watch and leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Subscribe now. Before we begin, share in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there is a cemetery in your town that unsettles you, type its name, because once you step past the gates of these haunted resting grounds, not everything allows you to leave. Kill the lights. Silence the world. Take a slow breath. And let us begin. I don't care if anyone believes me. I just need to put this out there before it chews a hole through the rest of my life. I'm not writing this for attention, or to get some cheap scare points. I'm writing it because I can't sleep without my blinds closed and a towel shoved under the bottom of my door. Because a part of me still listens for nails on concrete even when I'm in a crowded cafe. And because I honestly think the thing I saw wants other people to look at it too. If you're from Hayward, you probably know Lone Tree Cemetery. If you aren't, it's a quiet hillside with a view of the bay if you squint. Nothing about it screams famous, just a lot of granite and grass and families visiting on Sundays. There's a story though. Folks around here talk about a black dog that wanders the graves at night. No bark, no growl, just a watcher. Some people swear its eyes glow red. I used to roll my eyes at that. That was before last fall. That was before my sister started leaving a bowl of water on the porch for something none of us owned. The week it started, I was between jobs and doing deliveries in an old Civic with a door that rattled like a shopping cart. My best friend Marco was crashing on my couch after a breakup. My younger sister Lena was taking a night class at Chabot and coming home past 10. We weren't exactly living a spooky life. Bills, microwaved food, squeaky apartment stairs, the usual East Bay soundtrack of sirens and someone's bass shaking the walls at midnight. One Tuesday, I got a late delivery run that took me past the cemetery. The roads back there are sleepy after dark, and you get these pockets where the streetlights don't reach. It's not like the movies where fog rolls in like dry ice. It's more like the air just stops being air for a second and turns into a thought you don't want to finish. I remember the smell, eucalyptus and wet dirt like the ground had been watered recently. My phone was streaming a podcast and I was trying not to think about how behind on rent I was. I only noticed the dog because it was sitting in the center of the road like it had been waiting. I braked hard. My bag slid off the passenger seat and I thought about the 1-star review I'd get if I delivered someone's burrito upside down. The dog didn't move. It wasn't huge, not like a mastiff or anything. Just a regular-sized dog, coal black so it sucked up the light around it. I flashed my high beams. It didn't blink. That was weird. But I've seen raccoons and strays pull stubborn acts before. I rolled down my window and clucked my tongue like you do with dogs. Nothing. It just stared at me. No head tilt, no curiosity. Just this calm, patient stare like it knew my face already. I inched forward and it finally stood, smooth and deliberate, and walked off the road into the grass. Relief shivered through me. I rolled the window up and started driving again. My hands were sweaty on the wheel, which was stupid. It was just a dog. The podcast kept playing, some guy talking about a historic fire in Oakland, and I tried to let the ordinary noise drown out the weirdness. When I glanced in the mirror to check my delivery bag, the dog was there again right in the middle of the road behind me, the exact same way, like I'd driven in a circle without turning. The rational part of my brain did its best. There are lots of black dogs. There are side streets. It could have been a different one. Sure, fine. I got the food to the apartment complex without dropping a tortilla. Back home, Marco was up, playing some game on mute and eating cereal straight from the box. Lena wasn't home yet. I told him about the dog. He smiled like he does when he knows I'm spooking myself and said, "It heard about your Yelp rating and came for a bite." Then he leaned over our little balcony to look at the parking lot and said, "Dude, no way." His voice wasn't joking anymore. I stepped out with him. The lot was empty except for a few cars and some plastic bags skittering in the wind. Under the streetlight in that circle of sodium orange, the black dog sat. Same way, same stare. 4 stories down, quiet as a posted notice. Stray, I said, but my mouth was dry. Marco was watching it with a kind of polite distance, like when a cop car rolls by and you're trying to look boring. You ever hear that story about the cemetery? He said. I shrugged. Everybody's heard a version. It's just sitting there, I said, as if that made it less strange. Don't feed it, Marco said. Don't even look at it too long. He went back inside. I stayed because that's what I do when something feels off. I stare until it fits in a box. The dog never moved. 5 minutes, 10. A car pulled in, squealed into a spot crooked as a question mark, and the driver, some kid in a beanie, didn't notice the dog at all. He walked right past the streetlight, and the dog didn't turn. It was like the whole thing was a photograph someone had pasted into real life. Headlights swept the lot, and poof, when the light hit that circle, there was nothing. My shoulders sagged like someone had cut a string holding me up. I went inside and told myself it was gone. I slept with the TV on. The volume turned down low so it made that soft hiss of voices telling the time to pass. Wednesday, Lena came home from class with a story of her own. There was a dog, she said, tossing her backpack on the sofa, at the bus stop on Foothill. It didn't do anything. It just stared at me. I tried to whistle to it, but it didn't have a tag. What did it look like? I asked, even though I already knew. Black, she said. Like super black. Like my phone camera couldn't catch it right. Why? I told her. And she laughed the way you laugh when you don't want to be the younger sibling who admits they're scared. But when we went to bed, I heard her moving around in the kitchen. In the morning, there was a bowl of water on the doorstep. Just in case it's thirsty, she said, not meeting my eyes. The ordinary stuff kept happening. Work, errands, the sink backing up again. But it was like all of it was a soundtrack under something else. At the laundromat on Mission, a toddler started crying because she dropped her stuffed animal. And when I bent to pick it up, I saw through the smudged glass door the reflection of a dog behind me. I turned, nothing there. Only the hum of oil-stained machines and that sweet dryer sheet smell. My hands shook so hard I dropped quarters all over the floor like hail. The toddler stopped crying. For a second, the room felt like it had been covered by a clear lid and the air had nowhere to go. By Friday, I'd gotten good at telling myself I was making it all up. Our brains are good at that, putting a frame on something and calling it explained. Marco and I were watching a late game replay, arguing about a blown call when there was a soft tap on the balcony glass. Not a knock, not the clatter of a moth, tap, tap like a fingernail. I muted the TV. Tap. The lights in the living room felt suddenly too bright, like they were exposing us. Cat, Marco said without standing, like he was talking to the idea of me being nervous. Then it came again. Tap, 3 beats, tap, 3 beats. Like a metronome someone had set for my heartbeat. I walked to the sliding door and spread the blinds with 2 fingers. The balcony was empty. Beyond it, the parking lot was a pale rectangle. My reflection in the glass was an outline with 2 tired eyes. In the reflection just over my shoulder, a dog sat under the balcony light. I turned, slow, my stomach feeling like it was full of cold tea. There was nothing but our kitchen table and the cereal box Marco never rolled up properly. In the glass, the dog's eyes didn't glow. They didn't do anything dramatic. They were just fixed on the place where I was supposed to be. I let go of the blinds and stepped back. See anything? Marco asked. Yeah, I said, and picked up the TV remote like a talisman. Us, being stupid. That should have been the end of it. Dog stories. Shared nerves. But the next day, Lena had a project for her photography class. She wanted to shoot long exposures at sunset. I offered to drive her up to the ridge by the cemetery because the view is nice, and because part of me wanted to prove to myself that I could be near that place and not make everything about a ghost story someone told me in high school. We brought Marco because he didn't like being left out, and because I pretend to be braver when there's a witness. It was one of those windy evenings where the sky breaks into strips of pink and gray. We parked on a side street where the eucalyptus trees make everything smell like medicine. The cemetery gates were closed but not locked, and we weren't going to go in, we told ourselves. Lena set up her tripod right outside, catching the way the light pooled on the granite like spilled milk. A jogger ran by, waved, kept going. A car full of teenagers with a Bluetooth speaker did a slow circle and disappeared. Normal life wasn't impressed with us. There's a groundskeeper, Marco said, pointing to a small office by the gate. The door was open. and a man in a canvas jacket was drinking coffee and reading something on his phone. He had the right vibe for the place. Practical face, strong hands, the kind of guy you could ask for directions when your GPS died. He noticed us and lifted his chin in a hello. "Nice light," he called. "Gates close in 20 minutes. We're staying out here," I said. He nodded. "Good, easier for everyone." Lena took a dozen pictures. The wind made her hair slap her cheeks, and she grinned between shots like the whole project might actually work. I felt it too, that lift of being in a place for a reason that wasn't fear. When she looked at her preview screen, her smile fell a little. "Huh," she said. "What?" She showed me the last image. Perfect exposure, the stones like chess pieces, and there in the middle ground, neat and polite as you please, a black dog sat. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a glowing demon. It was a dog sitting between two graves, the way dogs sit when their owner stops walking. In the next photo, same angle, same light, the dog was gone. Marco squinted at the screen. It could be someone's pet. "Come on." We all turned to look. There was nothing there but grass and the shadows of the stones. The groundskeeper had come outside. He watched us watching the empty air. "You kids need directions?" he asked. His voice was friendly, but it had a guardrail in it. "You ever see a black dog out here?" Marco asked. Casual, like asking about raccoons. The man's face didn't change, but something in the way he set his coffee down did. He wiped his hands on his jacket. "People see all sorts of things if they come after dark," he said. "Wind makes sounds. Lights play tricks. Critters move." He paused, then added, "If you're smart, you'll take your pictures and go on home. Places for families during the day." That's my advice. We didn't argue. Advice from men who spend their lives near the dead should probably be taken. We thanked him and packed up. The wind made a shushing sound in the trees, and for the first time I heard it as a warning and not just weather. That night, Lena printed the photos in the college darkroom and brought them home in a manila envelope like a report card she was proud of. The dog was in 3 of them. Same posture, same distance, like it had found a seat in our project and wasn't leaving until the teacher graded it. "It doesn't look fake," she said, as if she needed me to bless the reality. I wanted to tell her to throw them away. I told her they were cool. She put one on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a grapefruit. At 3 in the morning, I woke to the smell of wet dirt. Not mold, not someone overwatering a plant. Fresh, clean dirt, like the first turn of a shovel in a garden. I lay there listening. The building made its own little chorus. Pipes clicking, someone walking above us, a distant TV laugh track. Under it, another sound, so faint I wasn't sure it was real. A small scrape, pause, small scrape. Like nails testing the hallway. I got out of bed and opened my door. Light from the microwave clock spilled a little green onto the carpet. The apartment felt big suddenly. Marco was asleep on the couch, face down, hand hanging, fingers almost touching the floor. The scrape came again. Not from inside, from the hallway. I went to the peephole and put my eye to it. The light in the hall flickered a little, which it always did. The tenant across from us had hung a wreath of fake leaves on her door. At the far end of the hall, closer to the elevator, there was a very dark smudge on the carpet like someone had tracked in mud. As I squinted, trying to pull detail out of the peephole distortion, the smudge moved. A step, a pause, a step. It was walking toward our door. I backed up, slow, palm flat on the wood like I could shove the whole apartment backward. The sound of nails, tap, pause, tap was delicate. I waited for a snuffle under the crack. The shadow stopped in front of our door. It didn't touch. It didn't whine. It stood there. I held my breath until my lungs started to burn. The pulse in my neck hammered. I kept thinking of that bowl of water on the porch and how generosity sometimes looked like bait. After a minute, the shadow moved on. I stayed there, glued to the door, until the hallway timer made the light kick brighter. When I finally looked through the peephole again, there was nothing but the wreath and a quiet hallway. I didn't sleep after that. I sat at the table with the black and white photo of the cemetery staring at me from the fridge and watched the edges of the room lighten as the sun came up. Saturday morning, I tried to be normal. I made eggs. Lena played music on her phone while she cleaned her camera lens, humming under her breath. Marco went out to get coffee and came back with an extra one for me, the way he does when he thinks I'm 2 minutes from saying something he can't fix. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, and wrapped my hands around the cup like my fingers could drink the heat. Around noon, our neighbor Mrs. Cho knocked. She's in her 70s and knows everyone's business in that kind way. where it makes you feel looked after instead of spied on. She brought us cut fruit and the warning that the building maintenance guy would be shutting the water off for 2 hours. She stepped into our kitchen and saw the cemetery photo. "Lone tree," she said, nodding. "My husband's brothers are there. You ever see a black dog up there?" Lena asked, too eager. Mrs. Cho's smile thinned. "People tell that story since I moved here. Before, I think. I don't go after dark. Do you believe it?" I said. She looked at me with that sharp, kind look older people have when they decide if you're ready to hear something. "I believe some places collect what we don't finish saying," she said. "Sometimes something takes care of that. Sometimes something just keeps watch." She patted my hand and left us with watermelon and that sentence to chew on. We tried to bury the whole thing under weekend errands. That evening, the three of us ended up back near the cemetery because Marco claimed a taco truck out that way had the best lengua in a 20-mile radius. The sun had already dropped behind the hills. The sky was that bruise color before it goes truly black. We weren't going to go in, obviously. We just ended up parking near the gates because that's where the truck was. And walking eats tacos better than sitting in a car with the steering wheel in your ribs. Music from someone's phone drifted by, then faded. A couple took selfies under the tree by the corner. The groundskeeper's office was dark. The gates were closed, chained. Inside the cemetery, the stones were smooth shadows. I didn't want to look, so that's how I knew Marco was about to dare us into something. He gets that spark in his eye like he's about to announce a road trip. "We should just walk the fence," he said. "Tell the dog we're not scared. Close the loop or whatever," Lena said. "We're not going in. The way you say I'm not going to text my ex, and I knew we already were." We left the taco wrappers in the trash and walked along the outside of the fence. The chain link rattled in the wind. Eucalyptus leaves clacked. Our shoes grated on gravel. We didn't talk. It felt like talking would say yes to something we hadn't decided. Halfway down the fence, where the hedge gets thicker and the sidewalk narrows, we stopped. Not because we saw a dog. Because we saw a kid, a little boy, maybe 6, standing inside the cemetery about 10 feet from the fence, staring at the gate like he was waiting to be picked up from school. He had one of those bowl haircuts that moms did with love in the 60s and 70s. He was wearing a striped shirt. He wasn't crying. He wasn't moving. He was just there. "Hey, buddy," Lena called, immediately switching into nice grown-up voice. "You okay? You lost?" The kid turned his head and looked at us. He didn't smile. He didn't run over. He just looked. There was nothing strange about his face. That was the strangest part. It was a normal little boy's face, tired and patient. "We should get the groundskeeper," Marco said, but his voice was thin. "Where are your parents?" I asked louder, like volume could make this normal. The kid lifted his hand and pointed to the far side of the cemetery. We all followed his finger like we were following a magic trick. In that glance, in that half-second, a black dog was suddenly sitting between us and the boy like it had stood up out of the ground. No sound, no blur. Just there. Not big, not slobbering. Just a dog, blacker than the night around it. It looked at us and then at the kid. The boy didn't seem scared of it. He looked relieved. Every story I'd ever heard was loud in my head at the same time. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The dog stood slow and walked 3 steps toward the fence. It didn't come all the way. It just closed some space like it wanted to check our faces for something. Its eyes didn't glow, but the way they fixed on me made the back of my neck get cold. "We should call someone," Lena whispered, but no one took their phone out. No one wanted to look away. Behind us, someone's car door slammed and laughter spilled down the street, bright and normal. The dog turned its head listening, and then when its gaze came back, the kid was gone. Just gone, no running, no rustle. One frame to the next, empty grass. The dog sat down again right where the kid had been and lowered its head. If dogs can sigh, it sighed. Then it stood, turned away from us, and walked into the graves unhurried like a patrol. We watched until the dark made it the same shade as everything else. We didn't talk for a long time. By the time we got back to the car, Marco's bravado was a sweater he couldn't find. "Okay," he said. "We saw a lost kid and a stray dog. Maybe the kid's family came. Maybe the dog belongs to the groundskeeper. We should tell someone," Lena said. In case what?" I said, my voice came out rough. "In case we explain to a cop that we saw a kid who vanished? In case we get famous on the internet for freaking out next to a cemetery?" As if the word cop had been an invitation, a patrol cruiser turned the corner and slowed beside us. The window slid down. The officer inside was young, eyes tired, the look of someone who'd already had a long shift. His name tag said Pina. He glanced at me, then at the cemetery. "You folks doing okay?" he asked. "No suspicion, just a routine check." "Fine," I said too fast. "We thought we saw a child inside," Lena blurted, "because she is a better person than me. We were going to—" The officer's eyes did a small, almost invisible flinch. "Inside?" he said, glancing at the chained gate. "At this hour?" "We might have been mistaken," I said. My hands were on the roof of our car like I needed to hold on to something heavy. Officer Pina looked at each of our faces the way people do when they're trying to see if you're trying to see if they're lying. Then he nodded once. "I'll take a look," he said, but he didn't get out. He leaned across his passenger seat and keyed his radio. He kept his voice light when he asked for a second unit and a call to the groundskeeper. The cruiser's headlights stayed off. He didn't want to light the place up. He didn't want to draw attention from the dark to us or from us to the dark. That's the best way I can describe it. We didn't wait. I know that sounds cowardly, but it felt like the correct thing. Like we were extras in a play who had walked into a scene that wasn't ours. We drove home quiet like the car didn't want to be noisy either. When we got there, the water bowl was still on the porch. The surface had a thin layer of dust on it. I don't know why that detail made my stomach twist, but it did. That night I dreamed of a fence that kept moving, always 2 steps ahead, and a dog on the other side matching my pace. When I woke, the room was full of early light and the sound of our upstairs neighbors arguing about a missing charger. I lay there and told myself we had seen a stray dog, a boy whose parents had come for him, a cop who was doing his job. I told myself a lot of things. The day didn't care. It went on. Sunday afternoon, there was a knock on our door. It wasn't Mrs. Cho's soft knock or the maintenance guy's perfunctory one. It was the knock of someone who had come to talk about something you would rather avoid. Officer Pina was in the hallway, hat in his hands. Behind him, at the far end of the carpet, there were faint brown smudges like someone had walked through wet soil and forgotten to wipe their shoes. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "You were at Lone Tree last night." "Yeah," I said, pulling the door a little closer to my leg so he couldn't see my bare feet. Like that mattered. "We thought we saw," he nodded. "We got the groundskeeper out," he said. "Walked the fence. Didn't see any kids. He says folks get jumpy this time of year." "I'm sorry to waste your time," Lena said from behind me. "Wasn't a waste," Pina said. "If you think you see a kid alone, you call. Always." He took a breath like he was about to say something else, then changed his mind. "Listen, I shouldn't. There's an old story about that place." He smiled without humor. "You probably know it." "The dog," Marco said, unable to keep the curiosity out of his voice. Officer Pena stared at the hall window. "When I came on," he said, "an older guy told me to be polite if I ever saw a black dog out there. Said to treat it like it belonged. Said don't whistle, don't call it, don't try to get it in the car. Just let it be." I thought he was messing with me. Then one night I got a call. Someone said a dog was loose, scaring people in the cemetery parking lot. I went by, didn't see anything. Wrote it up, he swallowed. The tendons in his jaw jumped. The next morning I turned in my resignation. I didn't. He shut his eyes, opened them. I didn't resign, he did. The guy who told me the dog story, he left a note that said it wasn't a dog. We all stood there in the small silence. The building hummed. Downstairs someone laughed. Outside a skateboard rattled over a crack. Normal life shoved its way between us like an apology. "Have a good day," Officer Pena said and left. He didn't look back. I didn't watch him go. I didn't want to see if something watched him from the end of the hall. By Monday it had stopped being a ghost story and started being a schedule. Every night, sometime between 2 and 4, the faint scrape in the hallway. Every morning on the path by the parking lot, small, neat paw prints where no dog was allowed. Lena stopped leaving water on the porch. Marco stopped making jokes. I started checking every reflective surface before I stepped into a room. Not in a horror movie way. Just this quick glance to make sure my face didn't have something looking over my shoulder. Sometimes in my phone's black screen before it lit up, I thought I saw 2 dark coins where eyes might be. I stopped checking my phone in the dark. We tried to stop talking about it. That made the whole thing louder. On Wednesday, I told myself that if I drove a different route home, if I avoided the turn by the cemetery altogether, this would all roll back like a bad dream. I took the long way, through streets so familiar I could have closed my eyes and navigated by the cracks. It didn't matter. At a red light by a strip mall, a shadow peeled off the shade of a tree and crossed the road without hurry. It didn't look at me. It didn't speed up. It moved like it had every right. It was a short, simple fact. It existed, and so did I. That night at 2:30, the scrape was louder. And then something new. A low thump, like someone had leaned against our door. I got up, because that's the kind of idiot I am, and stood there holding my breath. The thump again, a little higher up, like whatever was out there was testing the weight of the wood. "Don't," Lena said from the couch, soft but steady. "Don't open it." I wasn't going to, I said, but my hand was already on the knob. I pressed my ear where the peephole was and listened. No breathing. No jingling collar. No normal dog sounds. Just that low thump every 30 seconds, like a heartbeat under the building. The next day we went to the library. That's what you do when the world stops making sense. You go find old paper to tell you how to name it. The librarian, gray hair pulled into a bun that had seen real weather, brought us a stack of local history books and a binder of clippings someone had put together decades ago. We sat at a wooden table under the fluorescent hum and felt like kids again, playing at being serious. In one clipping from the late 1960s, there was a small article about a boy who died after a long illness. It was a plain piece, the kind of thing written with respect and distance. At the bottom, a line mentioned that his parents had buried him with his favorite toy, a stuffed dog, because they couldn't afford a real one. "He always wanted a pup," the line said, and I felt something in my chest tilt. In another clipping, years later, there was a letter to the editor complaining about teens trespassing in the cemetery and seeing a devil dog. The editor's note called it local color. There were reports, scattered, about a stray that comforted mourners by sitting nearby without begging. There were also reports of people feeling watched, and one of a man who claimed he'd been followed to his car by something that looked like a dog until it didn't. "People make patterns out of anything," Marco said. He sounded like he was trying to convince himself to stop reading. Lena traced the edge of a photo of a grave with her finger, not touching the person in it, not touching the stone. We copied the clippings anyway. We took the boy's name and tucked it in our pockets like a charm we weren't sure how to use. All day, the city felt thinner. Lights flickered a beat too long after switching on. A kid dropped a soda can at the bus stop and jumped like it had barked at him. The wind carried the smell of cut grass and something like wet slate. That evening, I came home to find the bowl of water back on the porch. I didn't put it there. Lena didn't either. Marco swore on our friendship he hadn't. It was full to the brim, and one edge of it touched the doormat, leaving a dark crescent where a paw might have bumped it. We didn't bring it inside. We didn't dump it out. We just stepped around it like it was dangerous to disturb. It's hard to describe how you make decisions in a situation like this. You don't sit down and vote. You just find yourself standing at the gate of a cemetery after dark, because part of you thinks the only way out is through. We went back to Lone Tree on Friday, me, Lena, and Marco, at the same hour we'd seen the boy. The groundskeeper's light was on. We knocked on the open doorframe. He looked up, the lines around his mouth deeper than I remembered. He recognized us and didn't bother to hide it. "Lost your picture-taking light," he said, pretending to be amused. His eyes flicked to the chain on the gate. "We wanted to ask," I said, and told him about the boy in the clippings. I didn't say the dog. I didn't have to. His jaw set. He took a small breath and let it out through his nose. "I know the story," he said. "We all do who work here longer than a season." He's got a spot. "People leave little stuffed animals sometimes. I pick them up if the rain comes." He looked at our faces, measuring. "If you think you need to go in there tonight, don't. Come back in the morning. Ask the office. We'll walk you to the grave. You can leave your respect, then go home." "What happens at night?" Marco asked. It came out quiet. The groundskeeper sipped coffee that had gone cold. "At night," he said, "what belongs in here walks where it wants. If it wants outside, it finds a way not to need gates. If you're smart, you'll let it be." He raised the cup. "It's not aggressive. That's the mercy. It just looks. That's worse for some people. I wanted to be smart. I wanted to go home and never come back." We said thank you. We walked back to the fence. The wind had died. The trees were holding their breath. The chain on the gate looked colder than metal should. Lena slid her hand through the links and held the air on the other side like it was someone's hand. "Re-say the name," she whispered, and did. The boy's name slipped into the dark like a coin into water. Nothing moved. We stayed there too long. That's on me. I kept thinking something would happen that I could understand. Instead, a sound I will hear in my head until I die drifted over the grass. A small, single, friendly click, like the snap of a fingernail against glass. Then another, closer. Tap, tap, like a code. The dog stepped into the lamplight near the office, not from behind a stone or through a gate, but like it had been standing in the only part of the shadow we weren't looking at. It looked at us and then looked down the road, the way you look when you're waiting for someone to pull up. My mouth said thank you before I could stop it. The dog tilted its head half an inch. Then it turned and walked the line of the fence, passing us without any hurry, and kept going toward the far corner where the hedge is thick. It didn't look back. It didn't need to. We stood there until our legs ached. When we finally forced ourselves to leave, the groundskeeper watched us from his doorway. He didn't shake his head. He didn't smile. He looked like a man who knows that the river will always go where it wants and that the banks can only pretend to guide it. Nothing dramatic happened after that. If you want to jump a snarling thing, a chase, I can't give you one. The truth is dumber and worse. We went home and the dog came with us. Not in the elevator. Not on the stairs. Not visibly. It came in the way air comes in. It sat somewhere I couldn't point to, and watched us do dishes and argue about a bill and pretend to watch a show while we really watched the corner of the room. It didn't make a mess. It didn't knock things over. It just made the world lean a degree in its direction. The last night I saw it, really saw it, I woke up because the room had that feeling of being observed that your skin recognizes before your eyes do. The digital clock said 3:07. The towel under my door was in place, which is a dumb action, I know, but it made me feel like I could keep air in. A slit of light from the street cut the edge of my blinds. I tried to pretend I needed water and got out of bed so I could have something to do with my hands. In the kitchen, Marco's cereal box was a paper tent. Lena had fallen asleep with her head on the table over an open textbook. I put a blanket over her shoulders, and she stirred without waking, making that tiny sound people make when they're safe. Or think they are. On the balcony beyond the glass, the night was soft. My reflection made me look older. In the reflection, past my shoulder, the dog sat under the balcony light again. This time there was no mistaking it. This time I turned slowly, and when I turned, it was there on the inside of the glass on my side, sitting in the kitchen doorway looking at me. My body did not move. The part of me that might have flailed or screamed or run was very far away behind a wall. The dog's eyes were dark, the way deep water is dark, and they were not cruel. That's important. They were not cruel. They were curious. They were so patient it hurt. I said the boy's name. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. The dog blinked once. It looked at Lena, then at me. It stood, and for a second its back brushed the table and the grapefruit magnet on the fridge trembled. It stepped closer. It was not heavy. The air around it smelled like wet dirt and something faintly sweet like old flowers. It didn't open its mouth. It didn't show teeth. It just leaned until its nose almost touched my knee. The whole world was a held breath. Then it turned its head, looked at the photo on the fridge of the cemetery, and let out the smallest, softest sound. Not a whine, not a growl. A breath through its nose that could have been a yes. I don't know what I said to it. My mouth moved. Maybe I said, "We see you." Maybe I said, "He can go home." Maybe I said nothing and the words were only in my chest. The dog stepped back. It walked to the balcony door. It wasn't blocked. We never open it at night because the latch sticks and the landlord claims it's our fault. The dog looked at the glass. Then it was gone. Not outside. Not in a puff. Just not there. The way a thought leaves you mid-sentence and you have to clap to get it back. Lena shifted under the blanket and made that little sound again. The towel under my door stirred as if someone had brushed it with their foot. The apartment exhaled. I stood there for a long time with my hand on the back of a chair like I might float away if I didn't anchor myself. In the morning, the bowl of water on the porch had been pushed to the edge and half spilled. On the welcome mat, ours says "Welcome" like a dare. There was something small, almost lost in the fibers. I bent to pick it up and froze. It was a button. Plastic, cheap, off-white with a tiny crack. It didn't mean anything by itself. It could have belonged to anyone. It could have been from a thrifted coat, a pillow, a backpack. But when I turned it over, someone, years ago, decades, had scratched a letter into it with a pin. a single initial, the same as the first letter of the boy's name. The scratching wasn't neat. It was the work of a kid's hand. I put the button on the windowsill. I didn't tell Marco or Lena right away. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted one thing that was only mine, the way kids pocket rocks because they have the shape of a place. Time did its job. Things got less sharp. The scrape in the hallway stopped. The bowl stayed empty, and then I threw it away because it felt like a question I was tired of answering. Lena finished her project and got an A. Marco moved in with a coworker in San Leandro and brought our cereal box with him like a joke. The groundskeeper at Lone Tree waved at me once when I drove by, and I almost waved back like we were old friends. I was going to let the whole thing settle into story. That felt safe enough. That felt like a way to carry something heavy without dropping it. Then, a week ago, a new family moved into the unit across the hall. You hear the basics through the wall if you live in an old building long enough. Single mom, 2 kids. The younger one, a little boy with a haircut that made me think of that old clipping, likes to push his toy cars up and down the hall rug while his sister plays with sidewalk chalk on the landing. They're careful and quiet. Their mom always says thank you when you hold the elevator. I got home late 2 nights ago and heard a small sound coming from the hall. Tap, pause, tap. It was rhythmic, like a game. I stepped off the elevator and saw the boy sitting on the carpet, rolling one of those cars with his finger. No sound from the TV in their unit. No sister, no mom. Just him, making his own entertainment out of friction and patience. "Hey, champ," I said in my most neighborly voice. "It's late. You okay?" He looked up at me with the exact practiced calm kids in apartments learn. "I'm waiting," he said. "For who?" I asked, even though I already knew. He looked down the hall toward my door, then back at me. "For the dog," he said, like he was saying he was waiting for the elevator ding or for a commercial to end, like it was a normal part of his evening, steady as any other. I stood there with my keys in my hand and felt the building lean 1 degree in a familiar direction. The lights did their small flicker. A eucalyptus breeze came down the hallway even though the windows were shut. That faint, sharp smell like clean medicine. Behind me, on the elevator's mirrored panel, there was a dark shape in the reflection that didn't have a body to go with it yet. I told the boy it was time to go inside. I walked him to his door. His mom smiled gratefully and apologized in a tired whisper. When I turned back into the hall, something sat at the far end where the carpet is always a little darker from years of footsteps. It didn't move. It didn't need to. I unlocked my door with both hands like I was trying to keep them from shaking, went inside, and pushed the towel into place because I'm not brave, and because I don't know whether it wants me to be. I keep thinking about what Mrs. Cho said, about places collecting what we don't finish saying. I keep the button on the sill, and some nights I turn it over just to make sure the letter is still there. I told myself I wouldn't write any of this down because stories make doors where there used to be walls, and I've had enough of doors for a while. But the boy across the hall knows about the dog now. The scrape has started again, softer than before, like nails kept short out of politeness. Sometimes, when I wake up at 3, I think I hear the friendly tap of a nose against glass, a sound you might mistake for a curtain brush if you were lucky. Sometimes I smell wet dirt and old flowers, and sometimes the smell is nothing and my brain is mean. I don't know if the dog is good. I don't know if good is the point. I think it keeps watch over the unfinished edges and the people who live near them. I think it sits for hours without asking for anything. And maybe that's why it's worse than teeth. Maybe patience is scarier than hunger. If you go by Lone Tree, don't whistle. Don't call. Don't try to make it yours. If you see a kid waiting, tell someone. If you hear a tap in the night, it might be the pipes. It might be the wind. It might be something old and polite reminding you that you're not alone, not even in the spaces you lock. And if you look into the glass and see 2 dark coins where eyes should be, don't press your face closer to check. That's the only practical advice I have. Turn on a light, step back, let it look. It seems to be what it wants. And if in the morning you find something small on your doormat that doesn't belong to anyone in your apartment, an old button, a marble, a toy car wheel, you can throw it away if that makes you feel better. I keep mine on the sill because it makes me feel like someone finished saying a thing they were too tired to say when it mattered. Tonight, the towel is under my door. The blinds are closed. The city is doing that quiet 3 a.m. thing where it feels like a lung between breaths. I'm trying to sleep without listening for nails on concrete. I'm writing this down like that will help. If you're still reading, you're part of the looking now, and I'm sorry. It's probably nothing. It's probably a story. It's probably just the building settling. It knocks like that sometimes. Tap, tap, tap. I never planned on writing about this, but after what happened in Oldtown last week, I can't keep it to myself. And it's easier to talk to a bunch of strangers on the internet than to look my sister in the eye. If you know San Diego at all, you know El Campo Santo, the small cemetery that looks like a pocket park with a low white wall and a few old headstones. It's the kind of place that gets featured on ghost tours and souvenir shot glasses. I used to roll my eyes at it. I worked nights at a coffee place down on San Diego Avenue, 2 blocks from the cemetery, and when the tours stop by, people ask for the haunted latte like I'm part of the show. My manager, Kendra, loves it. She tells me to lean in, smile, add cinnamon, tell a story. Most nights I just keep my head down, steam milk, and listen to my coworker Miguel talk about Padres scores or whatever drama his upstairs neighbor is stirring up. I'm not a believer. Or I wasn't. My sister Lila moved in with me at the end of summer after a breakup. She's 26 and stubborn in that way where she insists on new beginnings. She works mornings at a yoga studio off Juan Street, the one with the laminated cards at the door announcing, "Please remove shoes. Respect the space." She leaves before sunrise, and I get home after midnight. We pass each other like trains in fog, but we try to catch up when we can. On Tuesdays, we walk the block after I lock up because the air goes soft and eucalyptus-scented, and the tourists finally go quiet, and even the lights from the museum settle into a kind of dusk of their own. It's nice. It was nice until it wasn't. You should know a few harmless-seeming things that people say about El Campo Santo. 1. If you park near the wall, you'll set off your own car alarm without touching the key. 2. If you step on certain patches of asphalt on the sidewalk or in the street in front, your feet will go hot, like you're standing on a stovetop. 3. If you're there late at night, you might hear Spanish whispers that sound like they're coming from the ground, telling you to move. Levántate. Quítate. No pises los cuerpos. Get off the bodies. The reason they say that is because when the city put down roads in the 1800s, they didn't move everyone. They paved over some of the graves. There are little metal discs in the street that mark where the bodies are supposed to be, but not all of them are marked. You know how stories go. Someone doesn't get a marker, and decades later a waitress is telling you about a bad feeling and a blister she can't explain. The first time something felt off, it was small. It was a Thursday night, early September, weirdly warm. We were closing up, stacking the outdoor chairs when Miguel elbowed me and tilted his chin down the block. "Ghost parade," he said. One of the late tours was moving along, all those tiny lanterns bobbing. Guide in a top hat like it was Halloween even though it wasn't. The group stopped near the cemetery gate. The guide held up a device that beeped and flashed a row of little green dots. "Spirit box," Miguel muttered like it was a brand of cereal. We watched because everyone watches. It's like rubbernecking for superstition. Then all at once 2 cars on the street started their alarms and the guide didn't even flinch. Just raised his eyebrows as if he'd ordered that. And the crowd oohed. The alarms went off, then on, then off in that broken way old car alarms do, like they're coughing. I told Miguel it was nothing. Some nearby construction rattling the frames, heat expanding metal. He tried to high-five me for the rational take. On the walk home that night, Lila and I passed the cemetery. The wall is low enough to peek over if you're tall. I'm not, but Lila is. She slowed down and put her palms on the stucco and squinted in. "There are candles," she said. I stood on the curb. She wasn't wrong. A few of the graves had glass candles set at the corners, the tall kind with paper labels of saints fading from too much sun. One had a little cluster of coins pressed into the dirt like someone pushed them in with a thumb. I felt this pull to put my hand on the ground just for a second, like touching a warm dog. I didn't. We kept going. We passed a taxi idling by the museum, driver leaning his head back on the rest, eyes closed like he was trying to force sleep. "You ever hear the crying woman story?" Lila asked. I told her no, and she seemed pleased to have one up on me. A driver said he heard someone crying in his back seat, like ugly crying, but nobody was there. He kept checking the mirror, kept pulling over to look. Empty. He quit that night. She said it like a dare, like she was trying to scare me. I told her it was probably the radio, some late-night call-in show. The second thing happened that Sunday. Lila came home from a morning shift with 2 blistered circles on the balls of her feet. She said it started like a prickle while she was talking to a woman about class packages at the studio, and then it was like stepping into a shallow pan of hot water, only she wasn't stepping anywhere. She'd been wearing those simple yoga sandals with the thin soles. She took them off at the door like she always does, because she believes in rules like that. And the skin stuck a little and made a soft peeling sound like lifting tape. The circles were the size of bottle caps. "I think you need thicker sandals," I said, and she laughed at me. "I walked past El Campo Santo," she said. I cut across the street because the light was taking forever. Felt it when I was near the brass markers. Then she wiggled her toes and tried to be tough about it, but later I could hear her in the bathroom, opening and closing the cabinet, running water. Those tiny sounds of pain people make when they don't want to say ow. Monday I asked one of the police officers who gets coffee on the late shift if he knew anything about cars setting their own alarms by the cemetery. He's tall and neat and always orders decaf, Officer Rios. He smiled like he knew a story. "Static," he said.
"Wiring, who knows?"
"But yeah, we get calls. People stand in the street after dark and wait. It's a dare. The asphalt is hotter there sometimes. Some of the tourists bring thermometers." He pantomimed, pointing a laser thermometer down at the ground, a degree or 2. "It gets people going." He chuckled, but then he did that thing where a smile falls off in parts like it's unhooked. "You should keep the doors locked after midnight," he said, which he's never said before. "And don't park by the wall." That same night, a little before close, a woman came in right as I was wiping down the pastry case. She had that road trip burned look, tan where the sunglasses didn't cover, hair a frizz from the ocean. She asked for hot water and held out a mug that was definitely not one of ours, with a chip on the rim and a drawing of a lighthouse. I filled it for her and said she could have some tea on the house. We were about to throw out the batch. Her hands were shaking a little. She said thank you and sat near the window. After a minute she got up, came back to the counter and asked if the cemetery was that one right there. I said yes. She sighed and said, "I thought I heard someone under my feet." She managed to laugh, light, embarrassing herself, like she wanted me to reassure her. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. She took her mug to go. I watched her turn the corner toward the white wall and not speed up or slow down. I didn't see her after that. It's a short block. I told myself she took a left and disappeared, into the dark, because that's what tourists do in a new city, vanish into Airbnbs shaped like other people's lives. The little metal discs in the road bothered me more each day. They're easy to miss. They look like no smoking sign coins without the slash, just round brass set into blacktop, stamped with words that are hard to make out unless you kneel. Some of them say grave, some of them just sit there, dull, unhelpful. I noticed how people walk around them without seeing them, like we're hardwired to avoid circles. Lila noticed me noticing and teased me about it. "You're converting," she said, like I'd joined a church. Maybe I was. A kind of slow religion built of avoidance. On Wednesday, I got a text from Miguel at 1:12 a.m. "Dude, are you hearing that?" I lived 3 blocks away at the time, above a leather goods shop that always smelled like new belts. I walked out to the fire escape and leaned over the railing. The city makes its own night sound. Freeway hush, distant laughter, a bottle clinking and recycling. But there was something else underneath, like someone pressing a radio up against my floorboards at a volume too low to make sense. I stood there a long time, listening to the nonsensical rhythm of it. A syllable here, a breath there. Every so often a car alarm bleated once and stopped, like someone had tapped the hood. Lila came out and rubbed her arms, looked up at me like I was being dramatic. "It's louder in the bedroom," she said, and went back inside. I didn't sleep, and I made worse coffee than usual the next day. Around noon, an older woman came by who I'd seen around the neighborhood for years. She has a tiny dog that rides in her tote like a furry loaf. She introduced herself as Ms. Ortega, and told me that when her grandmother was a girl, there were wooden crosses where that street is now. They took them down, she said. Not all, some. The ground doesn't forget. She told me how her grandmother would go to the wall and leave a coin and a bread heel and whisper a little apology. She shrugged. The city swallowed everything. I guess that's what cities do. Before she left, she leaned in and told me almost conspiratorially, "Don't stand where you feel the warmth. Even if you can't feel it at first. Something remembers." Then she slipped a small saint card onto the counter. a picture of San Pasquale with pixelated hands, and told me to keep it near where I sleep. I put it in the tip jar like an amulet we could all share. Maybe this is where you roll your eyes. I hear you. But then there's Thursday night, which is when things snapped into focus hard enough to leave a mark. The ghost tours were in full swing. You could hear the chorus of different guides telling the same stories from different angles, like a round of row, row, row your boat, where every verse ends in "you won't believe this." The heat hadn't broken, and the sky was the color of fabric softener. I locked up and texted Lila to meet me for our little walk. She showed up in slides, bandages on the balls of her feet, moving like she'd grown new bones and wasn't sure how to use them. Miguel decided to tag along because he said he'd heard everything about the cemetery for 4 years and had never actually gone inside the little gate. He brought a thermos to look casual. Hydration, he said. It smelled like whiskey. We crossed over by the brass discs. I tried to keep to the gaps between them like a kid avoiding cracks. A couple stood by the gate, arguing in that tourist way where they keep their voices low to make the anger look like intimacy. A ghost tour guide swung his lantern back and forth, and the light warmed the names on the headstones. Estudillo, Osuna, before it reached us. A security guard with a badge that said Alvarez stood near the far corner, arms crossed, watching but not intervening. He nodded like a doorman. I nodded back. It felt polite. Inside, it's clean and small. The graves are close together, white posts and chains marking some off from others. A big pepper tree leans like it's in on a secret. We didn't mean to linger, but that's what people do there at night, like it lowers your blood pressure. Lila read names out loud in a voice that was almost a whisper. Miguel walked the perimeter and touched each chain post as if he were playing a private game. I stood near the tree and tried to imagine the cemetery without the fence and with the street as dirt and with the night so dark that candles would look like arrivals from another country. Then the woman started crying. I didn't see her. I only heard it. And at first I thought it was someone in the house across the street with their windows open. But the cry was close, right behind my left shoulder. The way your name feels close when someone says it who you know very well. It was the kind of crying you hear in a bathroom at a restaurant. The kind that makes you want to leave the stall and ask if you can call someone. Miguel turned with his thermos raised like he was toasting something only he could see. Lila grabbed my arm and squeezed so hard that I felt her nails later when I changed. Guard Alvarez looked toward us and didn't move. I said, "Ma'am," and felt stupid immediately. The crying hitched and then smoothed out again into that deep, tired sound people make when they've been at it too long. I was about to take a step toward it when Lila tugged me back and whispered, "Don't," in the concrete way she never uses with me. You don't argue with that voice. We stood like that in a tableau while the cry filled up and thinned out. Somebody's car chirped once outside the wall. No one in the cemetery looked at it. The couple by the gate stopped arguing and both put their hands on the metal like they were bracing for a wave. The guide raised his lantern, and the glass hissed as if the heat inside it wanted out. The crying got quieter, like the person was walking away except you couldn't point to a direction. I took a small step back and the ground under my heel went warm. Not scalding, just an unmistakable heat that wasn't from the air. I told myself it was a patch of asphalt, except I was standing on packed earth, dust-colored silver by the lantern. I moved my foot again and the heat stayed with me like I'd stepped into a beam of sunlight. Miguel whispered, "Nope," into his thermos. That made me want to laugh, and I did, a little, which felt obscene and wrong, like laughing at a funeral just because your mouth needed something to do. Then something tapped the chains. A small sound like a ring hitting metal. Alvarez finally moved. He walked along the edge of the fence past us, and I noticed he wasn't making eye contact with anyone. He had a look on his face I recognized from when I've seen firefighters standing near a thing they can't fix yet. Alert, patient, resigned all at once. He reached the gate, stepped outside the low wall, and looked down at the street. I followed his gaze. A man in a baseball cap was standing exactly on one of the brass discs, and he was trying to feel something happen. He looked like the kind of guy who would tell you he wasn't superstitious, but also wouldn't let you put your hat on the bed. He bounced on his heels. He laughed to himself like people do when they're alone but want any nearby witnesses to know they're having a good time. Alvarez said something to him I couldn't catch, and the man stepped off the disc and onto the regular asphalt and then back on again, like a kid testing the edge of a pool. The heat under my heel intensified as if to answer, and when I shifted, it followed. I felt stupidly fragile, like a water balloon waiting for a thorn. We left. There isn't much to say about it except that I didn't want to stand there anymore. And Lila was shaking without making a sound, and Miguel had gone pale in a way that made me suddenly aware of everyone's skin. We walked back toward the shop and then cut across toward our street. Another car chirped and then stayed quiet. The sidewalk under my feet felt normal again. Lila asked if she could sleep on the couch because being on the floor in her room made her feel too close. I didn't ask close to what. Miguel said he was going home to Google. White dirt is hot. He tried to give me the thermos. I told him to keep it. You're thinking the climax came and went. I wish that was the taste. The real thing happened 2 nights later, when I closed alone because Miguel called out, said he had a headache he couldn't shake. It was after midnight when I clicked off the last row of track lights. The street was nearly empty. A couple of cops strolled by. Low voices and a cluster of college kids drifted past, all screams and laughter. On a whim, I stepped outside the door without locking it and just stood on the sidewalk listening. The air was thicker than it should have been, considering it had cooled a little. I put my hand out over the pavement and felt that baked-in warmth the day leaves behind. I drifted toward the corner, telling myself I'd walk to the intersection and back, no detours. The cemetery sat like a quiet audience to my left. Halfway down the block, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but the air felt weird and I wanted to hear a human voice, any voice. Hello! There was a pause and then, "You're the coffee place guy," a male voice said, like he was figuring it out while he spoke. "You gave me the extra espresso last week." I remembered then, a taxi driver had ordered a hot tea and asked if we had anything for headaches. I'd pulled a shot and told him to dump it in and pretend it was medicine. He tipped $5 and winked a tired wink. "I brought someone to Oldtown tonight," he said. "A woman. I dropped her by the cemetery because she said she wanted to, feel something. Then I got a block away and I heard her crying in my back seat. Loud. I pulled over and got out and opened the door and there was nobody there." He laughed, but it wasn't a laugh. "I called the number on the card you gave me because I didn't know who else to call. I hadn't given him a card. I don't have cards." There was static. I could hear my own voice, small. "I didn't give you a card." He was quiet a second, like he was checking a memory for smudges. "Huh," he said. Then, I think something followed me. He hung up. I stood very still and felt ridiculous and very awake. I turned to look at the cemetery. It looked back in the way empty places do. I took another step down the block. That's when the first car alarm went off. One short bleat and then another answered it, and then both locked into that out-of-sync duet you get when 2 alarms are cheap and old and hungry for attention. I could hear a third in the distance, like a sympathetic dog. The sound bounced off the storefronts, doubled back, turned itself into a swarm. I thought of what Officer Rios had said, wiring, static, anything mundane, and tried to tuck the explanation into my pocket like a phone I didn't want to drop. A man across the street was fiddling with his key fob and swearing in a whisper. "It's not me," he told nobody. Then he pressed the button again and his car stopped yelling and then started up again on its own. "It's not me," he repeated, and I believed him, which was new. I turned around to go back to the shop, suddenly aware that I'd left the door unlocked. I was walking quickly, not running because I didn't want to be the person who runs from nothing. The glass door was a rectangle of dull light, and for a second I thought I saw someone move inside. I stopped. The street was empty. I waited, counted to 10, and then kept walking. When I reached the door, I saw my own reflection and felt stupid in a rush of relief so strong it made my knees weak. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The crying was waiting for me in the shop. It was quiet, like it had been turned down to make it polite. I leveled out in the silence, afraid if I moved too quickly I'd shatter something that would be impossible to clean up. The crying wasn't coming from the bathroom or the back room or anywhere you could point. It felt like it was embedded in the air the way a smell is sometimes. Not on any one surface, but in the room itself. "Hello?" I said, because I'm predictable. The crying took a breath and then continued. I stood behind the counter and put both my hands flat on the stainless steel like I was swearing something. I looked up, and in the large window at the front I saw a reflection of the shop like a photograph that had been taken when nobody was ready, a little blurry, a little off. In the reflection, there was someone sitting in the corner table, head bowed, shoulders shaking. In the room itself, the chair was empty. I'm not brave. This isn't a hero story. I didn't march over and recite an Our Father and demand a name. I stood there and said, "You can sit here as long as you want," to no one. That felt like the only polite thing that wasn't lying. The crying steadied. My phone buzzed again and I jumped. It was Lila. "You close?" I typed back, "Yes, almost," and left out the part about hosting a sound. Outside, one of the car alarms finally died, and the quiet that followed felt like a heavy train had passed. I looked at the window again. The reflection was just me and the empty chairs being their innocent selves. The crying faded the way a radio does when you drive out of range. I locked up, which felt silly, but I did it anyway. When I stepped outside, I could hear my own footsteps too clearly. I made myself walk to the corner because the story I was telling myself had a rule now. Don't run. I turned back toward the cemetery. Nothing moved, but there was a faint hiss in the pepper tree, and it wasn't wind. It sounded like words that had been worn down to their outlines. When I got home, Lila was on the couch, as promised, and my living room smelled a little like the St. Candles from the cemetery. Paraffin and cheap paper label and a whiff of something like carnations left too long in cloudy water. She had her laptop open and was watching some narrator tell a story about a haunted stairwell in the Midwest. She turned the volume down when she heard me. "How was your night?" she asked, and I said, "Weird." And then I decided not to go into it, which now seems like a mistake, because secrets grow in the dark like mushrooms. I made us toast because that's what I do when I don't know what else to offer someone. We ate on the couch and watched and didn't talk much. The apartment felt a tiny bit overoccupied. Around 3:30, I woke up to a noise like light tapping. At first, I thought it was a neighbor knocking on a wall, but it had no rhythm and no insistence. It felt exploratory, like a new pet touching everything once. It was coming from the floor. I lay very still because moving felt like an announcement. The tapping shifted to a sort of soft scrape, like dry leaves being pushed around. My first irrational thought was mice, which somehow would have been a relief. Then I thought of the crying and of Ms. Ortega's grandmother leaving bread at the wall, and of Alvarez and his patient doorman Nod. I got up and stood in the doorway to the living room. Lila stirred and pulled the blanket over her shoulder, but didn't wake. The tapping became a whisper. I can't tell you the words. Maybe this is where you stop believing me. Maybe I don't believe me either. It was not Spanish, I understood, but it had the shape of Spanish in it, the sibilance and the soft ease. Every once in a while I'd catch a fragment that felt like a gloss, like a subtitle flashing up for a second, "Move, lift, not here." The sound came from under the rug, and then under the couch, and then under my feet, never in one place long enough to pin it to an angle. My skin did that cold prickle thing, but it wasn't fear only. It was like embarrassment and awe had a baby. I wanted to go downstairs and stand on the sidewalk and see if anyone else could hear it. But it was 3:30, and I'm not the version of myself who knocks on neighbors' doors at that hour. I did the next dumbest thing. I went to the kitchen and took the Saint card out from the corner of the fridge where I'd stuck it with a pizza magnet, and I set it on the floor by the couch. I have no idea why. The whispering paused like I'd turned a dial. Then it came back softer, like it had moved further away, like maybe it had gone down into the building's ribcage and was trying out the beams for resonance. In the morning, Lila said she dreamed she was walking across a room with a low ceiling and had to keep ducking because the ceiling had hands. She laughed when she said it, but then she showed me the bandages on her feet, which had bled a little in the night. Tiny moons on gauze. She said, "Can we not cut across that street for a while?" And I said yes, because sometimes you love someone by not arguing with their superstition. We avoided the cemetery corner for a week. You can do that, even when you live 2 blocks away. You can invent new routes like a rat in a maze, and at first it feels like a game, and then it feels like the game is playing you. I started parking on the far side of the block, even though it meant waking up earlier to move my car for street sweeping on Fridays. The car alarms didn't stop. They just became part of the air the way train whistles live in some towns. The night tours kept coming. I saw Alvarez most evenings, and we developed that nod you share with people who are in a story with you that you haven't agreed to tell yet. One afternoon, Ms. Ortega stopped by again with her dog loaf and told me her niece's friend's cousin had gotten a ticket for jaywalking, and the cop was apologetic in a way that made it worse. We laughed. Then, as if casually, she said, "Do you hear anything in your floor?" I froze, but tried to make my face not do anything interesting. "Like what?" I said, the way people on TV say it when they're buying time. She tilted her head. Sometimes the building carry sounds like a shell. She didn't push. She bought a cookie and left me a 5 for a $2 charge and patted the tip jar saint on his pixelated head. Saturday night, the driver called again. I keep the windows down now, he said, like he was picking up where we left off. I thought maybe the air would flush it out. He exhaled into the phone. Last night I got a ping at a hotel by the airport. I pulled up and nobody was there, but the ride was still on the screen. Usually that means the person's in the lobby, you know? But the door opened like somebody got in. I checked the mirror. It was empty. I started to say something to make a joke of it, and then my passenger rating popped up on the screen. 5 stars with a little note that said, "Thank you for listening." I said his name. I won't repeat it here because he didn't ask to be in any story beyond that, and he went quiet, like he was counting the way he breathed. "I don't go near the cemetery now," he said, "but sometimes I can tell when I've driven over something that doesn't want me to." Then he said, "I'm sorry," and hung up. I still have his number in my call history, but I haven't called it back. You might be wondering why I didn't leave. Where would I go? This is my home, which sounds dramatic until you try to pack your life into plastic bins. Also, it's easy to bargain with yourself when nothing touches you directly except the hot patches on the street and the feeling of something you can't prove borrowing your room for the night. You make deals. Don't cross here. Don't stand here. Turn the saint card to the wall at dusk. Rinse the coffee urns an extra time. Sleep with the door open. Lock the door. Sing a song under your breath when you pass the pepper tree. It sounds like I'm mocking myself, but I'm not. The rituals keep the day moving. 2 nights ago, we were out of milk, and Lila offered to go to the little 24-hour market at the corner because she said the night air would help her sleep. I wanted to go with her and didn't say it because I didn't want to be that brother. She left her slides by the door and wore sneakers because she listens to what hurts her. I stood at the window to watch her go without making it obvious. She took the long way around the block as we'd agreed. A minute later, my phone buzzed and her name lit up. "Come outside," she said, voice flat, emptied out of adjectives. I did, still in socks, which is a weird way to step into a street. She was standing at the corner, not the cemetery corner, but the other one, and she was looking down at the gutter. There was a tiny stack of coins set neatly against the curb. 3 pennies, a dime, another penny, pressed down like thumbprints. Next to them, someone had left a slice of bread, torn and dense, not the kind we buy. The bread was fresh. It looked like it had been placed seconds before. Lila looked at me like she wanted me to know she hadn't done it. I looked around and no one was nearby. The cars were quiet. The windows were mostly dead. From the cemetery's direction, we could hear a single voice from a guide project, the beginning of a story. The kind of projection you learn in drama class. Chest voice, round vowels, but then it cut off, like someone had closed a door in the middle of a word. Lila nudged the bread with the side of her shoe and it didn't crumble. "Is this a joke?" she asked me. I didn't answer because I didn't know who the question was for. We left the bread alone and went back upstairs and did that thing where you prepare for bed with extra steps, so you can talk while your hands are busy. Brush, rinse, condense the small day. I set the saint card on the bookshelf, face out. "Do you ever think it's not mad?" Lila asked. Like maybe it's warning us, or maybe it's just lonely. I wanted to say something about how the city doesn't owe us silence, how the dead don't owe us rules. I wanted to sound wise. I don't get to be wise. I told her the taxi story instead, without the ratings part, because she likes stories with rules in them, and the rules seemed obvious. Don't invite. Don't taunt. Don't demand. I'm almost done. I know this is long. I'm telling it long because this is how it unfolded. Slow, sideways, with ordinary things you can hold in your hand and then not hold anymore. Last night, the crying came back to the shop at closing like a regular. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was the sound of somebody finishing a thing. And I did something I still can't decide if I regret. I filled a paper cup with hot water and I set it on the corner table and I said, "You can have this if you want." The air swelled, not in temperature, but in that way a room sometimes inhales just before people clap. I waited, then took the cup back because leaving an open cup overnight violates a health code that no one enforces, but I've internalized. When I threw the water in the sink, a thin fog rose like breath. I set the empty cup next to the saint card under the counter. And when I left, I looked at the window and didn't look too hard at what the glass was willing to show me. Tonight, Lila is asleep on the couch again. She says the floor in her room vibrates a little, the way a phone does when it's trapped between cushions. I can hear the freeway's faraway zipper. I can hear distant laughter. I can hear my upstairs neighbor clatter a pan in the sink. And beneath that, the light tapping, the whispering that climbs up through the building and levels itself under our feet like it's laying out a blanket. Every now and then a word rises clean enough to set down here. Quítate, soft as a sigh. Ms. Ortega's dog made a humming noise earlier when we passed her on the stairs. Some animal chord tuned to the background hum, and the dog laid its head on her shoulder like a tired child. If you go to El Campo Santo, I think you should be quiet. I think you should keep your hands to yourself and your feet to the cooler parts of the street. I think you should leave people who are trying to finish something alone. This isn't a warning in the way campfire stories are warnings. I can't tell you that you'll be dragged down by a hand or pulled into a carriage or have your tires slashed by an invisible blade. I can tell you that when you cross that corner, something might take a quick inventory of you, your heat, your steps, your attention, and decide whether it's safe to ask you to move. Some nights it won't ask. Some nights it will stare through the window of your life until you set out a cup of hot water. Some nights it will travel with you and then thank you for listening in the language a phone app understands. I'm writing this because I've started to step around things that aren't there in daylight. And that seems like a slow kind of madness I want a record of. The city is layered with people who had places to be and never got there. And it's a funny arrogance to think the asphalt makes any of that neat. If you come by the shop after midnight, I'll pour you a coffee and we can sit for a while and not talk about it. The car alarms will probably go off once or twice. The pepper tree will hiss in the almost wind. If you feel heat under your shoe, step aside. It doesn't hurt to apologize even if you don't know to whom. If you hear crying, keep your voice low. If your feet start to prickle, don't argue with the ground. When you get home and lay down, if your rug murmurs a word that sounds like move, roll over and give it the space it's asking for. And if you feel foolish in the morning like you indulged some bad neighborhood myth, that's fine. I feel foolish a lot now, except just now while I was typing this. The tapping paused and a small voice that isn't a voice came thin as a seam through the boards. And I leaned down without meaning to, and I put my ear almost to the floor the way a kid listens for trains. I shouldn't have. It was there, clear as a whisper passed through a keyhole. No encima de nosotros. Not above us. I stood up quick and the floor moaned like an old bed, and Lila made a sleepy sound on the couch and then settled again. I don't think we're in danger. I think we're in somebody else's way. When I close my eyes, I can see the brass discs glinting through night grime. I can see Alvarez, watchful and tired and kind in his stillness. I can see Ms. Ortega's half-smile, her grandmother's bread offering, the way the crumbs gather in the cracks. I can hear the taxis idle, waiting for drunk laughter and wrong addresses and the soft surprise of someone crying where nobody sits. And under it all, the soft friction of a sentence all the way down, a whole city saying excuse me to itself over and over, asking us to pick our feet up. I don't know if this will help me sleep, but if you walk that block and feel something warm where it shouldn't be, do me a favor and step to the side. If a voice tells you to move, listen. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's static. Maybe it's just the past working through its own late shift. Either way, I'm leaving the saint card facing out tonight, and I'm not standing on the rug. I never meant to become that person who posts about ghosts like they're talking about car trouble, but this has sat in my chest for months and it's starting to feel like a lodged breath. I'm not here to convince anyone. I just want to put it somewhere that isn't only in my head. My name doesn't matter, but I live in the Inland Empire. I've driven past Pioneer Cemetery in Colton 100 times. Blink and you miss it, fenced in, tucked behind a line of low palms and a tire shop with a faded blue awning. I always figured it was one of those old pioneer plots you mention, when there's nothing else to say during small talk. I didn't know the story people in town tell, that if you're there at the wrong hour, you hear a child laughing, and if you wait too long after you hear it, you hear the same voice say, "Don't leave me here." The first person to pull me into this wasn't a paranormal nut, just my coworker Marco, the type of guy who hands you gum and calls you boss, who wears a reflective vest even when he's off the clock because he forgets it's on. He's patient in a way you only get from years of answering dumb questions at job sites. He told me he and his cousin Lena were going out there after our Friday shift to take pictures for a class project. He offered me a ride, said it'd be quick. I told him I'd meet them there in my car because I had to swing by my sister's first and drop off a long folding table she was borrowing. The sun went down while I was fumbling with bungee cords. I could smell the neighbors' laundry from their backyard dryer vents and somebody's cheap cologne on the evening air drifting off baseline. My sister's porch light was one of those yellow bulbs that makes everything look like it's already a memory. By the time I pulled up, the sky was a deep blue with a smear of orange low over the freeway. The cemetery sits by itself, a square of grass and dirt with stones you don't read so much as squint at. A chain-link fence wraps it, not to keep anything out, I've since decided, but to keep something from being forgotten. There's a small gate with a latch and a sign that's more rust than paint. The tire shop across the street had its bay doors halfway down. A single fluorescent bulb hummed in the office like a fly trapped at the end of summer. Everything else had that heavy Friday night stillness that makes regular noises feel deliberate. Marco's truck was nose in along the curb. He leaned on the hood pretending to scroll his phone, and Lena was looping her camera strap around her wrist again and again until it left red lines on her skin. She waved. She's the kind of person you assume is younger than she is because she's all bright eyes and blunt bangs. But she's 22, and serious, and quick. She had those little clip-on lights like glowworms for photography, and she was excited about capturing texture. That's what she said, texture. It made me feel like the gravel should pose. We went in at 8:37 p.m. I know that because I checked the time to send my sister a sarcastic, "If I don't text in an hour, ghosts" message. The latch on the gate was one you lift and jiggle, the way you do at your aunt's house when the wood swells from old rain. On the other side, there was a concrete path that pretended to divide the place into neat lines. But the stones didn't care. Most of them were small and low, nearly swallowed by grass. You could feel the age of it immediately, not like in a movie, but in the smell. Dry weeds, cold dirt that had been turned over 100 times, and the faint powder of old flowers crushed into the ground. A couple of plastic roses lay face down, sun-faded to a weird purplish gray. We weren't the only ones. A man in a windbreaker was walking along the fence with a flashlight he kept switching on and off like it was misbehaving. He nodded at us and kept moving. There was a woman near the center, older, with a bag against her hip, arranging something on one of the stones. Not flowers, coins maybe. She moved like she did this every week. On the far side, 2 teenagers sat straddling the low wall like it was a bus stop, passing a vape between them, trying to look bored. You could hear the distant wash of the freeway, the occasional chirp of a car alarm sensor arming across the street, a dog throwing a bark at nobody from 3 blocks over. The sky had cooled into a flat navy, and the tiny plane lights out toward San Bernardino blinked without urgency. "Okay, so I need like wide shots for context," Lena said, pulling the little light out and giving everything a softer outline. "And then the weeds and the stones, the textures, and whatever your friend told you about the voices." I thought she was kidding. "My friend told me nothing," I said. "I read a thing on a forum. It's like local ghost mail, late 1800s scarlet fever, lots of kids. Unmarked graves. People hear a child laughing sometimes, and sometimes on EVP." Marco grinned. "Electronic voice phenomenon," he said in a deep announcer voice. "Tonight on a very special episode of 2 Idiots and a Camera." We started toward the middle where the stones grew sparse. There's a busted tree stump there with a candle stuck to it. Wax dribbled down like it had fallen asleep mid-sigh. Somebody had left a tiny toy car, one of those bright matchbox ones, green with chipped paint. It looked new in time but old in everything else. I toe-tapped it gently so it spun and stopped, the way you do when you don't want to admit to yourself that you're testing something. "Don't be a jerk," Lena said. "Leave things how you found them." "Sorry," I said. "Respect." "Actually," she said softer, looking past me. "Do you hear that?" I did what idiot characters do in movies and tilted my head like my ears were in my jaw. At first I heard only the freeway and the high distant buzz of those electric lines you don't notice until you're underneath them. Then I heard a sound you would not call a laugh. It was that thin, breathy giggle kids do when their throat is dry and they're trying to stay quiet, like the giggle a 4-year-old uses when they're hiding under a blanket and you pretend you can't find them. It came from the far side near the fence where the ground dips and tiles poke up at odd angles. It came and went like somebody opening and closing their hand. "No," Marco said, too fast. He smiled in a way that meant he didn't like his own smile. "Nope, that's a bird." "Birds don't giggle," Lena said like a teacher. "Maybe it's those kids," I said, nodding to the teenagers on the wall. But the boys were gone. The wall was empty. There was nobody, just the wind tilting the tallest weeds so the tips made a dry paper sound against the fence. We stood there long enough to prove to ourselves that we weren't running away. Then we kept going because embarrassment beats superstition 9 times out of 10. Lena took her wide shots. Marco pointed his phone flashlight at the ground at just the angle he thought would make a shadow look interesting. I walked slower than I meant to. The stones had dates you had to bend close to make out. The numbers had that 19th century style, where ones have fancy tails and everything looks like it was trying to grow up straight, and then had to learn to curve. There were a lot of small markers. Some had nothing but a last name. Some were just chunks of rock that had been there long enough that they felt official by seniority. A chain of ants cut across one and kept going like we were in their way. We saw the woman with the bag again, closer now. She was placing pennies, head side up, on several stones in a row. Her bag was a soft leather that had seen better years. When she looked up at us, she had that way of seeing that older people who live with history get. Like she measured faces by how much they understood. She nodded and went back to her pennies. "Do you come here often?" I asked, then immediately felt like an idiot. "Every Friday," she said. "My brother is here somewhere." That's what my mother said. He died in the fever and they put him in a trench. No marker. You can either be angry at that or you can choose not to leave him. So I come and I pick a few. I pick the smallest ones first. She blinked and her eyes were wet but stubborn about it. "You all be respectful now." "Yes, ma'am," Marco said. We walked on. Somewhere a screen door creaked. The hum from the tire shop went quieter as the fluorescent flickered off, then on, then off for good. The man with the windbreaker had left without any of us noticing. The night felt like it closed another button. Lena wanted ambient sound for her project, so we did the thing people do. You put your phone on voice memo, you say where you are, you set it down. I rested mine on the tree stump with the candle as a landmark. She did the same at the base of a small stone with only a last name carved shallow into it. Marco propped his phone against a rock face down like he thought that would make it hear better. "Don't laugh," he said. "It's like microphones, right? You point them at stuff." We left them there recording and stepped back to the path. Steps sound different on a cemetery path. You try to walk normal, but you lift your feet more and you place them more and you realize you're hoping the dead, who you don't really believe can hear, will notice your good manners. Nobody talked for a minute because we all felt how easy it would be to make a joke and ruin the fragile bravery we were pretending to have. Another noise came. Not the giggle, softer. The kind of startled inhale a kid makes when they're about to cry but they're trying not to. Sucked in and put down somewhere deep like a coin being saved. It came from the same dip in the ground near the fence. The fence there had a section where the links were mended with 2 different gauges of wire. Like someone had cut a hole once, and someone else had tried to make it whole again with whatever they had in the shed. A little ribbon was tied there, sun-bleached to white. As we turned toward it, Lena's camera light caught something at our feet. Shoe prints. Small ones. The kind of sole with stars and little circles pressed into rubber like you'd find on a toddler's sneakers. They went from the path to the grass and then faded where the ground dried. I know, it's a city, there are kids walk places. But these prints went forward and didn't come back. "Okay," Marco said, distant, nearly cheerful. Nope, hold on," Lena said. "I want audio near that spot." She picked her way forward. I caught up because I couldn't let her outpace my pride and because, if I'm honest, the idea of letting her walk there without me felt like letting somebody go into a room at the top of the stairs when you know what the soundtrack is about to do. Marco stayed a step behind like he was the cassette tape that needed to be covered with a hand, but then decided to go along anyway. We reached the dip and stood in a crooked line like 3 picture frames that had just survived an earthquake. The ribbon on the fence trembled, though there wasn't much wind in our faces. I had the sudden stupid feeling you get on roller coasters. The latch on your shoulders feeling, the going up part. I thought, we should say something that means we know better. Something like we're not here to mess around, like this is your space. But what came out was just my name. The way you say it at the start of a voicemail when you forget you're at the tone already. It made me mad at myself. Lena lifted her camera to shoot through the fence toward the dark field on the other side. Her finger hovered above the shutter like a gesture of respect. The view became a simple lattice, a grid. Beyond it, silhouettes of low things, more stones. A faint line of palm fronds swaying like someone uneasy in their sleep. The giggle came again, close enough this time that it didn't feel like an echo. I swear to you it sounded not like a special effect, not like a Halloween decoration, but like a human throat. Young, dry, trying to be quiet. It was so close I had the feeling that if I put my hand out I would touch warm hair. "Hey there," Lena said quickly, softly, like she was talking to a cat. "Hey, it's okay. We're friendly." I felt stupid for how gently she said it and how loud my own breathing sounded compared to hers. The fence seemed like a cruel prop all of a sudden. We all stepped back the same half step, like the ground had a magnet set to push. From the dip rose a faint smell like old bed sheets that have been in a drawer too long. A sweetness that wasn't flowers. The air stirred our clothes. Something moved past my left knee without touching it. There wasn't sound to it so much as an absence, like when a refrigerator hum stops and you realize how long it's been on. "I'm going to get the phones," I said, too loud, because I had the instinct that if the night was going to answer anyone, it would answer a recording, and I didn't like that idea at all now that it hadn't been a joke. I walked back toward the stump. I tried to keep my pace so it didn't look like running, which it wasn't. But my heart was doing that 2 steps at once thing it does when you miss a stare. The woman with the pennies wasn't where we'd last seen her. The coins she'd left were little moons on the flat stones. The man in the windbreaker was standing by the gate now, fumbling with the latch. I wanted to call to him to hold up, but my throat felt like it had been dusted with flour. At the stump, my phone lay face up, the red bar showing it was still recording. Right in front of the phone, where there hadn't been anything before, was a marble. A shooter, the larger kind you use to knock the smaller ones. Glass cloudy with a blue curl inside, like a piece of sky had been dropped into water and got stuck there. I looked around like I was checking if the marble had a parent I needed to ask permission from, then picked it up before I could talk myself out of it. It was cold in my hand and somehow heavier than it had any right to be for a piece of glass the size of a walnut. I slid the marble into my jacket pocket because I didn't know what else to do with the feeling of it. The tiny toy car I'd spun earlier was pointing toward the center path now. I don't remember leaving it like that. I stopped the recording. Once I did, the air around me felt louder, like hush had been a thing I was holding. The leaves on the weeds whispered again. Somewhere a cruiser drove by with its windows down, radio talking low and fast to nobody. I picked up Lena's phone and stopped hers too. And as I did, a soft sound came from the voice memo speaker, just a whisper of tap-tap, like a small finger had touched the microphone by accident. I don't know if the app does that sometimes. I don't want to know. As I went back, I saw the woman with the pennies again over by the low wall, standing with a younger guy I hadn't seen arrive. He was in a church baseball tee, gray with a navy raglan sleeve, heavy cross necklace, a face you'd trust with your grandmother's stories. He was holding a stack of small votive candles and a lighter, nodding with that sad smile people wear when they're about to tell you something you won't be able to forget. I filed that away to avoid looking at the dip in the ground where the others were waiting. When I got back to Lena and Marco, they hadn't moved. Both were looking at the fence. On it, not caught, but as if leaned there and forgotten, was a child's mitten. Blue yarn, the kind you buy at a big store, pilled at the cuff. It was damp like dew, but my fingers didn't come away wet when I tried to touch it. The fence imprinted its diamond shape lightly on the palm of it. There was only one. "Stop," Lena said, and I did. And in that pause, a voice rose up from near our shins. Not a laugh, not a sob. A small, careful plea spoke in the way kids are coached to say please when they really, really want something. "Don't leave me here. We did every stupid thing you do when you want to prove to yourself you didn't hear a thing you know you heard." We pretended it was a cat. We knelt like we were looking for a dropped key. We called out, "Hello," with different intonations to see if our own voices could be the answer, but the grass didn't make room for anyone to stand up from it. The light from Lena's camera trembled because her hand did. Marco swore under his breath in Spanish, then again in English because maybe being bilingual helps. I don't know. Before any of us decided what pretending we could keep doing, a new voice joined us, human and very much alive. "You three okay?" the man in the raglan said, walking our way with his careful hands full of votives. Up close, his eyes were a tired kind, like he stayed at the end of wakes to stack chairs. Behind him, the older woman stayed back by the wall like she didn't want to crowd the moment. "It gets heavy here sometimes," he added. "Did you?" I started, and then raised a hand and let it fall because I was embarrassed at the sentence forming in my mouth, which was, "Did you hear the child voice asking us not to leave him here?" Because how do you ask that as your first question to a stranger? He studied our faces. You heard him, he said, just like rain is rain and not something up for debate. I'm Pastor Joe. I bring candles sometimes. People like to come at night and forget to bring a way to say something. He set the votives carefully on the ground by the dip. He didn't reach into it. He placed them arm's length like he didn't want to step on any part of space that might be not ours. There was a fever, he said, low, the way you say an obituary. Late 1800s. They dug a trench during the worst week, they say. Children first, because mothers couldn't bear to watch the little ones wait. The city back then was a handful of families in a wagon. The records are a mess. Families came later and placed what they could where they thought it might belong. There are names, but there are more not names. Friday's a busy night for him. Lena found her voice. But him? There are plenty of voices, he said. But there's always this one. Sometimes laughing. Sometimes hiding. Sometimes he says the thing you heard. He tilted his head, the way the older woman had earlier. He likes marbles. Marbles, I repeated before I could help it. The weight in my pocket felt like it moved of its own accord against my thigh. I didn't want that fact to exist, so I let it sit with us without telling anyone where it was sitting. Does he want people to do something? Like light a candle? Or say a prayer? You can say anything, he said. You can say a name if you have one. You can say we hear you. You can say you're not alone. The worst thing is silence. The worst thing is pretending. And the worst thing is leaving like you didn't hear him if you did. We didn't have a name. We had a mitten and a ribbon and a small rising panic that felt like someone unthreading your buttons in a crowded room. I looked at Marco. He looked at the ground. I looked at Lena. She had a look in her eyes that meant her brain was writing sentences faster than her mouth could organize them. The night had settled properly now. The streetlights 2 blocks over were tiny coins in the distance. The air had gone cool enough that I could see my breath when I huffed it out as a test. The freeway noise slid down a notch like it too had decided to listen. Maybe we should leave something, Lena said, voice thin like it had to sneak through a narrowing space to reach us. She dug in her bag. She didn't have kid things. She had a hair clip, a linty granola bar, a spare battery, a glossy postcard of a desert photograph someone had given her. She put the postcard down like a makeshift roof and then, deciding that felt wrong, tucked it back away. She placed the hair clip on the ground near the votives and then winced at the smallness of the gesture. Marco pulled a quarter from his pocket. Heads up like the lady, he said, glancing toward the older woman who nodded once from her place like a judge awarding a point. I had the marble. I had it. It was in my pocket like a warm denial. I pressed my fingers around it. It felt like it was the exact size of an apology. I thought about keeping it. Maybe yes, because it would be proof in my pocket later when I told myself I'd imagined all of this. Maybe no, because it would be proof in my pocket later when I lay awake and heard a small laugh from the foot of my bed, and didn't want to know what proof felt like then. I took it out. It shone with its own small answer to the camera light, milky with the blue twist. I set it down between the votives and the fence. For the first time that night, I felt the temperature of the ground where my fingers touched it, a coolness like a tile floor in a house where the air conditioner is always 2 degrees too low. The ribbon on the fence shifted as if the wire was breathing. A gust didn't lift our hair, didn't rattle the litter against the curb. The change stayed in the place we were looking. I didn't hear the voice again right then. I didn't hear a laugh. I heard the freeway remember itself and a palm frond whisper the way it had been whispering all night, and the small electrical snap of one of the votives catching a wick. We didn't leave right away because leaving right away after putting a marble down would feel like those people who drop donations in a jar and look around to make sure someone saw. We stood there with the pastor and the woman, and then, because it felt like it would be rude not to, we said a couple of small sentences the way you do when you have nothing eloquent. We're sorry, and we hear you, and you're not alone. The pastor nodded and held the lighter too long in his palm before remembering to put it in his pocket. The older woman said, very quietly, "Not anymore," and then closed her eyes like she was counting backward from 5. When it felt okay to use our legs, we took our recorders and walked back to the gate. The man in the windbreaker was gone. The teenagers we'd seen were nowhere. The chain-link latch did that same reluctant old house move. Out on the curb, the night air didn't feel like the cemetery's air anymore. It felt warmer by a couple degrees and a little dirtier, which is to say more normal. The tire shop was dark now. A guy in a baseball cap sat in a car at the light looking at his phone, unaware of us. The world is very good at maintaining before and after illusions. We said goodbye to the pastor and the woman and thanked them, the way you thank people who have helped you translate something awkward at a restaurant. Lena hugged the woman impulsively and then apologized in case hugging strangers isn't allowed anymore. The woman laughed without teeth and patted her elbow. "Bring pennies next time," she said. "Or don't, just remember." I drove home with the radio low, that comfortable back-of-the-throat DJ from the late-night station filling the gaps with talk about a car dealership grand opening, which didn't feel possible in a world where people ask not to be left. As I merged, a truck cut me off and I had to brake hard, and the plastic grocery bag I keep in the back seat for trash slid to the floor and popped open, and a can rolled under the passenger seat, and the normality of that sound made me breathe like I'd been underwater and finally broke the surface. The phone, face down on the passenger seat, vibrated once when a message came through from my sister. "You alive?" I laughed. This time it did sound like a laugh, and texted a simple "yep" at the next red light. At home, I did the dumb thing and listened to the recordings alone in the kitchen with the lights off like I was trying to make a mood, which I guess I was, against my better judgment. The kitchen window looks out over the alley behind our building. In it, the neighbor keeps a grill covered with a tarp that thrums when the wind gets the angle right. I heard that sound through the glass and told myself I didn't want to confuse it with anything on the audio. I set the phone on the table and hit play. There was the expected, our footsteps, the shuffle of my jacket sleeve against the microphone when I picked the phone up, the high tinny wash of freeway noise, a dog bark that made my brain locate the house it had probably come from. Then there was that soft tap-tap like a finger on a mic that I'd heard when I stopped the recording at the cemetery, right before the sound level dipped strange for a second, like the phone had been cupped. Then I heard it, so faint that if I didn't know what I'd heard with my ears, I would have thrown it out. A breathy thread of a laugh, cut too short like someone had just remembered they weren't supposed to be laughing. And then, in a way I don't know how to give you through the limitations of the story except to tell you it sounded like a mouth trying very hard to be brave. The quiet, small shape of words. "Don't leave me here." I stopped the recording so fast I knocked my knuckle against the table edge. The pain came sharp and dumb and human, and I was grateful for it. I paced the kitchen. I turned the lights on. I dragged the sliding door to the patio open and closed to feel the night air from my safe, normal apartment. The neighbor's baby cried through the wall, that hiccuping cry babies do like they're surprised their own throats can make sound. It cut off as swiftly as it had started. I stood there listening to a grown-up whisper to a baby, and somewhere in that whisper was the word shh, and somewhere in that shh was the reminder that shushing is for someone who is there. I locked my patio door even though I never lock it. I locked the front door again in case the first time had been one of those distracted locks that isn't a lock at all. I slept badly, but far better than the story deserves. My body decided it was very tired, and the world offered me the mercy of ordinary dreams. The kind where your friend is also your boss, is also your dentist, and you're late but your car can fly, and all the clocks are round. In the morning, my apartment smelled faintly, not of dust or coffee or my shampoo, but of old bed linen that had been folded away for a long time. It could have been my brain making associations. It could have been nothing. On Sunday afternoon, I took a plastic bag of pennies to an ATM and asked the machine to turn them into the paper equivalent, because I didn't want to stand in line and explain why I needed so many pennies. I rounded the total up and got $10 I had not previously had. It felt like cheating. I went back to the cemetery before sunset. There were joggers in the distance, a man pushing a stroller with a small dog riding in the basket underneath like a furry smirk. The gate resisted and then gave. I set the pennies in a neat little line on the stump with the candle and the car. The marble was gone. I hadn't told myself that I hoped it would be. I hadn't told myself that I hoped it wouldn't. It simply was not there. The hair clip had been moved an inch to the left like someone was making room, and the quarter sat where Marco had left it, heads up. The ribbon on the fence was straighter than I remembered. Pastor Joe wasn't there, and neither was the woman. The place looked the way places do when you've been there at night and then return during daylight. Smaller, less dramatic, and somehow more ashamed. I said nothing. I stood until I felt ridiculous for standing, then left because you can't live at a fence talking to the ground. A police cruiser rolled by slow, and the officer gave me the side eye you give to people who are acting normal in places where normal isn't expected. He didn't stop. Days passed. The smell faded back into regular apartment smell. The recording stayed on my phone like warm stones I didn't want to throw into the river in case they floated. I didn't open them again for a week. When I did, I opened the one that had recorded near the fence, not mine, but Lena's, because it felt like a weaker tea of whatever we'd sipped. Distance made it easier. I skipped through minutes like an impatient child. The choppy edit made ghost sounds out of everything. Then I found the part where we go quiet. And in that quiet, what I heard wasn't the laugh or the "don't leave me here." It was humming. A little unsure hummed tune. Like a song a child hums when their parent is in the other room and they want to sound brave. I couldn't place the tune. It was nothing. It was everything. I texted Lena. She texted back that she'd heard it too and then said something like, "I'm in the library. I'll text more later." Which people say when they want to think about what they feel before they hand it to somebody. The last thing I'll tell you is small. It's the kind of thing people who don't believe will find easiest to explain as nothing, because it was almost nothing, and that's why it lives in my mind like a paper cut. Last week, my sister called me to ask if she could keep the folding table an extra few days, and I said yes, and we talked about the dumb stuff you talk about when you like someone and want to hear their voice, and then I went down to the car to get a jacket I'd left in the back seat. And as I opened the back door, I saw, lodged under the passenger seat where the grocery bag had pulled it, a second marble. This one was smaller. Not a shooter. Clear glass with a faint yellow curl inside, like a captured sliver of candle flame. I hadn't bought marbles. Nobody I know has kids at the marble stage. Everyone's at the tablet stage. I held it in my palm and stood there in the late afternoon light, while a neighbor's radio in the carport 2 slots over played a song from the 90s. The kind where the chorus is just "yeah," sung a different way 3 times. My hand closed around the marble by reflex and then wouldn't open right away. I told myself it had fallen out of the gunk under my seat, part of the long archaeology of my car. Straw wrapper, parking stub, dried pen, sugar packet, unexplained twist tie. And then I thought about a blue swirled shooter that had been there and then hadn't, and a voice that said, "Don't leave me here." I took the small yellow curl marble back to Pioneer before I could argue myself out of it. The sky was a pale gray, like the world had been erased gently and hadn't yet been drawn back in. The gate was locked with a new chain, something the city must have decided on after a Friday night. I stood at the chain for a second, feeling like I'd arrived at a friend's house without calling and they weren't home. Then I threaded the marble between 2 diamonds of the chain link and let it sit in the fence lattice, just low enough that a small hand could reach it from the inside. I don't know why that felt right. I only know that when I stepped back, I heard a sound that could have been the freeway, or a bird, or an old palm frond getting talked into moving by a lazy breeze. It was almost laughter. It was almost crying. It was almost a voice saying something so soft I couldn't be sure it wasn't my brain, finishing a sentence it had started in my kitchen weeks ago. On my way back to the car, I saw Officer Ruiz, the local cop you see in 3 different neighborhoods like he's a mirage, half waving from his cruiser. He asked if everything was all right, and I said yes, and he said people come by sometimes and leave things, and that's fine. Just be quick. He said he used to come here as a kid with his cousin and knock on the stones like doors, but now he wishes he hadn't. Then he laughed that awkward laugh we use when we've said more than we intended, and I laughed too, and we both looked at the fence without looking at it. That night, lying in bed, I kept thinking I heard the faint rattle of small glass against metal. The sound a marble makes when a kid keeps it in their pocket and walks down a hallway. Not enough to clink, just enough to make motion have company. It could have been the neighbor's keys. It could have been my own uncontrolled heart. It could have been nothing at all. But I keep my patio door locked now. Not because I'm afraid something will come in, but because I'm afraid of the opposite, that something will stand at the threshold. Not trying to cross. Just hoping it won't be left, and I will have to decide whether I know how to answer. Whether I know if a story is enough of an answer, posted on the internet like a marble placed in a fence, level with a small hand. I never planned to talk about this anywhere, but last night my phone did something I can't explain, and I realized I'd rather you think I'm crazy than keep pretending it didn't happen. I live in the Bay Area, south of San Francisco, and if you know Colma, you know what it's famous for. More graves than living people. I used to joke about it because jokes make heavy things easier, but lately even saying the town's name makes my tongue feel heavy.
I'm not looking for sympathy.
I just want to stop being the only person lying awake at 3 in the morning, listening for the sound of stone weeping. A couple summers ago, my sister Lena was staying with me after her breakup. She's the sort of person who brings plants to life just by standing near them. She had this soft ritual every evening, closing the windows at sunset, laying a book face down on the couch like she didn't want to hurt the binding, asking if I'd eaten. We were good roommates. She took the bedroom. I took the pull-out in the living room near the sliding door that looks out on a narrow strip of grass and a fence. And beyond that, eucalyptus trees leaning over like old women gossiping. If the wind hit right, I could smell mint from the neighbor's planter box. That neighbor, Mrs. Chang, walked laps at dusk. She'd wave and her neon sneakers would flicker past like two fireflies. She never cut through the parking lot, always stayed on the sidewalk. Habit, she told me. Habits keep you safe. She'd lived there 20 years. Habits and common sense. Don't run the dryer after 9 in case the lint catches. Text your sister at midnight if she's not home yet. If you have to drive past Colma at night, keep the radio on and don't look at the cemeteries. That last one she said with a laugh that didn't sound like a laugh. I deliver for a food service during the week and work front desk at a gym on weekends, and in between I take photos, just for fun. Old buildings, streetlights cutting cones of fog, little things that vanish if you blink. Photography's one of those hobbies that teaches you to be still. You notice the small sounds, the hum of a transformer, the way a crosswalk's paint throws back the sodium light. That was my life. The gym, deliveries, quiet evenings with Lena and her plants, and a Netflix show we never finished because we kept pausing to talk. We were careful with our small things. Then my friend Marco came back from a graveside service for his co-worker's mother, and he brought a story like a splinter. He said they buried her at Holy Cross Cemetery and the place gave him chills, not from death but from how quiet it was. You ever been? He asked me at Phil's Coffee, stirring sugar into espresso like he was trying to start a storm. You can hear your own heartbeat out there. He told me about the statue, the Weeping Virgin. I had heard of it like everyone does if you live nearby the way you hear the weather. People say she cries at night, that cameras glitch around her, that a janitor saw her blink and quit mid-shift. Marco laughed when he said that. A cough of a laugh, then he rubbed his arm and said he took a picture and his co-worker's face looked warped. Not a filter. Not my hand. It bent like heat warps the air. He asked me to delete it, I did. But that night my phone kept turning the brightness up on its own. He gave me that look he gets when he wants someone to tell him he's being dramatic. I started to, then didn't. He said the mother had begged for her child back. I asked what he meant. He just shook his head and said, "It's a story," and looked over my shoulder like someone had called his name. I should have kept the story where it belonged, in the space between people at a cafe where you never turn your head fully. But a few nights later, we drove to Daly City for dinner, because Lena wanted the garlic rice from this place she loved. And after, we took the long way home. "Let's cut through Colma," she said. I haven't seen it since high school. It was one of those fog nights where you can taste the air, a loose sweater of mist. The cemetery slid by, headstones like teeth, mausoleums like government buildings for the dead. We didn't talk for a few minutes. The radio was low. The wipers tick-ticked even though it wasn't raining. Just the dew forming and getting wiped away, forming again. We passed a bronze angel pointing somewhere I couldn't see. Then the stone wall and the iron gate of Holy Cross, black bars, a cross at the apex like a hand resting on your head. We rolled by slow. "There," Lena said, leaning forward. She pressed her forehead to the glass. You could barely see into the grounds, just a suggestion of cypress and marble halos. "That's the one with the statue," I said. The tears, she smiled. "You'll take me sometime." "You know I like the old statues," I said yes. The word left my mouth before I thought about what it meant. We drove home with the fog cellophane wrapping the windshield. When we pulled into our lot, Mrs. Chang was doing her slow laps, phone flashlight on, scanning the concrete like she might find a lost coin. She waved. "Careful on your steps," she called. "It's slick tonight." My phone started acting up the next day. It wasn't the brightness. It was the photos. I pointed it at a bookshelf in good light and snapped a photo, and the edges of things were wrong. Lines bowed inward. Shadows thickened like ink. I cleaned the lens. I restarted. It got better, then worse. I blamed a software update that I hadn't installed. Later at the gym, A member asked if we could hold her membership for a month, and mid-sentence her voice dropped in my ear like a tape slowing down. It only happened for a second. She didn't seem to notice. I told myself it was the buzzing light above the front desk messing with my head. That evening, I was sorting through photos on my laptop when Lena drifted over with her bowl of cereal. She sat on the arm of the couch and scrolled through the last few days. Sunset over the bay, the crooked stairwell behind the gym, the eucalyptus shadows striping the fence. She stopped at a photo from 3 days ago of me and Marco at Phil's. "Why's Marco's face like that?" she asked. It wasn't like the whole face had warped exactly, just the jawline. It had a double, a faint, surprising repeat, like a reflection on glass, except it overlapped, like a shadow that forgot where to stand. I thought maybe my hands had trembled, but my hands don't tremble when I shoot. I told her I'd messed up. She didn't press. She never presses. She put the bowl down carefully and said, "Let's go tomorrow, before sunset. We'll only stay a little while." When we pulled into Holy Cross the next evening, the gatehouse light was on. A guy in a dark jacket waved us on. He looked young. He had a narrow face and the sort of haircut that would grow out well. I felt better seeing him. It made the place normal. The grounds were tidy. Lawn cut close, gravel paths raked neat. Fog softened the edges of everything. The statues had damp shoulders like they had walked through a misting station. We parked near a row of small headstones and walked toward the path where a map showed the main mausoleum and an older section downhill. There were a few other visitors. A woman in a thick sweater holding a bouquet, staring at a stone with a hand to her mouth. A teenager with green hair walking beside an older man who might have been her grandfather. A groundskeeper driving a utility cart with a rattling shovel in the back. The cart passed us and the driver nodded. He had a name patch, Ortega. He looked tired, but not in the haunted way people like to say. We kept our voices low without meaning to. When we talked, our words felt like smoke. Lena squeezed my arm when she found a statue she liked. An angel with a book, one finger marking a page. She loved the details other people miss. The way a chisel caught the curve where wing met shoulder, the soft wear on a toe from 100 hands brushing it. "Imagine carving all this and never seeing it again once it's set here," she whispered. "They make something so beautiful and then go back to regular life." We walked the path up a gentle hill, the grass wet enough to soak our shoes at the edges. I had my camera out but felt rude lifting it. The cemetery asked for something other than a lens. You don't know a place like that by collecting it. You know it by leaving it alone. Still, habit is habit. The shutter sounded too loud. The photos looked flat. Light didn't bounce right. I tucked the camera away and let myself be ordinary. We reached a small clearing edged with cypress trees, and there she was. The statue stood on a white pedestal slightly taller than me, both hands open, one at chest height like a question, one lower like a blessing. Her head tilted in that way that makes you want to be polite. The marble had a pale blue tint in the fog, like it remembered the sky. Her eyes had no color, just the carved suggestion of eyes. But from a few steps back, it felt like she was looking past us at something we couldn't see. Lena whispered, "She's beautiful." We weren't the only ones there. A man in a dark coat stood to the side with a camera he held like it was heavy. His hair was silver at the edges. A small boy with him, his son I guessed, was crouched, tying and retying a sneaker. The boy kept glancing up, then down, fingers working the laces like he was making a spell. The man nodded at us. I nodded back. Nobody talked. The place made speech feel like drumming fingers on a church pew. There were offerings at the base, votive candles in red glass, a rosary looped carefully on the pedestal, a small framed photo in a plastic bag to keep off the damp. I didn't look too close at the photo. Some faces aren't yours to hold. A woman in her 40s stepped into the clearing with a grocery bag and took out a single white rose. She placed it by the candles, swallowed like it hurt, and left. The light was tilting toward evening. Fog pressed in, not thick, just present. The cypress branches creaked like doors. A thin drizzle started, one of those sprays that feels like a breath. The man with the camera lifted it as if he'd changed his mind about being respectful. The boy leaned against his leg. He took 3 photos. One of the camera's settings beeped in that small, embarrassed way. He checked the screen, squinted, took one more. Then he lowered it, brow furrowed like he'd tried to remember a phone number and it had slipped away. I thought of Marco's story without wanting to. The mother who begged, the statue that blinked. I felt the stupid compulsion to test the superstition like a child testing an outlet with a paperclip. I took out my phone. I didn't aim it at her face. I held it to my chest and tapped the camera app and pressed the button casually, like I was checking something in my pocket. It clicked. A little spinning wheel. The image filled the screen. My thumb tightened. The frame was ordinary except for one thing. The dark shape of a cypress shadow didn't fall away from the statue the way it should. It reached. I could see the shadow's edge soften around her hand and tilt toward the camera in a way no physical shadow can tilt. Then the image sharpened and the line corrected as if rethinking itself. I told myself I had imagined it. The brain guesses and guesses not seeing. I erased the photo, but I kept my phone out like a person who keeps checking the time in a conversation they're not ready to leave. The man with the silver hair stepped closer to the pedestal and said to no one, 4 years. He cleared his throat. It's been 4 years today. And in his voice there was a stiff place, a place where words didn't fit right, and I thought, he's the one who begged. And then I thought how rude and arrogant to imagine that, as if loss wears a label you can recognize. A siren sounded somewhere far off, thin and slightly high like a kettle left on. The groundskeeper's cart rattled past at the top of the hill, and Ortega lifted a hand toward us in a gesture that meant closing time was leaning over our shoulders. We weren't done, but we were close to done. You can feel those minutes like the last sliver of sun on a day you didn't utilize well. My phone buzzed. A calendar alert I didn't remember setting. Leave by 7:10. It was 7:08. I looked at Lena. She raised her eyebrows. "You're better, Angel," she said. I grinned because I didn't want to be unkind in front of the statue. Something changed in the air, the way a room changes when someone you've been waiting for walks in quietly. Not a temperature drop, not a pressure thing, just the sense of someone leaning in. The drizzle paused. The fog thinned to a gauze. In that clear moment, a drop formed at the corner of the statue's left eye. Not red, not dramatic, clear water, catching the last of the white light. It hung there. It grew slow like dew forms. It quivered, stretched, slid. It left a faint trail down the cheek that looked darker than the marble for a second, then became the same pale again. But your eyes remembered where it had gone. I didn't breathe. I'm not sure any of us did. The man with the camera didn't lift it. The boy stepped slightly behind his leg. Lena put her hand on my sleeve and didn't squeeze. Just placed it there so I would know I wasn't alone. The drop fell and another began to form. The cypress creaked. Somewhere a bird moved its feet on a branch and dried leaves rubbed together softly. The second drop took longer. It swung like a tiny pendulum, then let go. The groundskeeper's cart engine cut. I heard Ortega call, closing in 5. His voice was apologetic in the way of people practiced at interrupting private reveries. The man with the silver hair finally raised his camera and took one single photo, then lowered it and bowed his head. He put his hand on the pedestal, fingers splayed like he was steadying himself on a train. The boy, seeing this, placed his smaller hand a few inches away, not touching the marble, just holding it in the air as if not to smudge a painting. Then they both stepped back together. As we walked toward the car, we passed Ortega parked near the main path. He was leaning on the cart, rubbing his right elbow. He nodded to us and said, "Night." Then after a second, "You guys okay?" His voice was gentle. I said yes. Lena said yes. He looked at the man and the boy who were a few paces behind. Then he glanced over his shoulder at the statue's direction and his mouth made a small shape like a person noticing they forgot their keys. I don't know why I asked him what I asked. Maybe I wanted to be told a lie that people here tell each other to make sleep easier. I said, "Do you ever see it?" He didn't ask what I meant. He took off his cap and smoothed his hair and put the cap back on as if those seconds bought him time. "I see a lot of things," he said. "Mostly people making promises." He glanced at the boy. "Mostly to themselves." Then he added as if saying it only because he felt I needed it. "If she cries, it's the weather finding a way." He smiled so I'd smile back. I did. The smile felt borrowed. On the drive home, Lena put her bare feet up on the dash and said she smelled eucalyptus. I could smell it too, a menthol ribbon through the car. We talked about ordinary things, grocery lists, whether the timer on the dryer buzzed too loud. A co-worker at the gym who kept asking me to spot his biceps but didn't rack his weights. We didn't mention the tear, not directly. I thought that was respectful, but later I realized it was fear shaped like respect. When we pulled into the lot, Mrs. Chang's lights were out. Her living room window, usually a square of yellow, was dark. I felt the small, silly grief of missing a routine. Lena carried a bag of basil she'd bought from a guy selling herbs out of a truck bed. She said she'd put it on the kitchen sill. I told her I'd bring in the mail. There were coupons and a glossy flyer from a funeral home with an angel on the front. I left it face down on the table because the halo on the angel looked too bright for a thing printed on cheap paper. That night, I dreamed about the statue's hand, the lower one, open like a bowl catching rain. I dreamed I wasn't allowed to see what was in the bowl. Every time I tried to look, the fog drew up a veil. Going to Holy Cross spooked me less than what happened after. For a few days, it was subtle. I'd open my camera roll and the thumbnail for the statue photo, the one I didn't remember saving because I thought I'd erased it, would be there for a second. Then it would be a different image entirely, like the phone had shuffled photos behind my back. Or I'd wake at 2:17 a.m. 2 nights in a row for no reason. No bad dream, just awake. And from the living room, I'd hear a drip I couldn't locate. Not the sink, not the bathroom. Inside the sound, there was a space like water falling into something soft. On the third morning, Marco texted, "You went, didn't you?" without a question mark. He came over with a bag of pan dulce and said he wanted proof I was still normal. He joked like he always does when he's scared. He asked to see my photos. We sat on the couch, the sliding door cracked for air. The eucalyptus leaves rattled. We scrolled. The statue wasn't there. I laughed, relieved. He exhaled, also relieved. Lena came out of the bedroom, hair crushed from sleep, and sat cross-legged on the floor. She said, "I had the weirdest dream," then didn't tell us what it was. She bit into a concha and sugar-dusted her shirt. Marco asked if I'd told the story to anyone else. I thought of the man at the statue and his 4 years and shook my head. "Let it be a place," he said. "Don't bring the place home." That afternoon, I worked the gym desk. It was slow. The air smelled like rubber and lemon cleaner. The TV above the ellipticals ran a looped news story about a water main break in Daly City, and the way the camera showed the water, bleeding from the pavement at a slow, unstoppable rate, made me think about the tear, and I had to walk into the office and look at a spreadsheet until my mind leveled out. When I came back, I saw a wet footprint near the front mat. It pointed in, not out, just one. It wasn't there a minute before. I cleaned it without mentioning it to the member on the treadmill. Because what do you say? A ghost came in barefoot? The rubber squeak of my shoe on the mat sounded like a small cry. That evening, the sunset was the color of peach flesh, and then it went sullen gray. Lena had a late shift at the coffee shop near campus. I heated leftover rice and sat on the couch with the sliding door open. From the fence line, a single eucalyptus seed pod dropped and pinged on the patio. The sound had a shape. I looked out. Nothing moved. My phone chimed. A new album had been created. Holy Cross. I didn't make it. I tapped it. 12 photos. But there hadn't been 12. There had been maybe 3. Each image was dull at first, like a low-resolution thumbnail, and then, if I stared, edges clarified. The statue from different angles I didn't take. The base with the candles shot from knee level like a child had held the phone. The cypress, its branches like the ribs of an umbrella. I told myself I had accidentally shot live photos, or a burst mode had done its machine thing. I scrolled faster. At the end, a photo of my own face, the front camera caught by accident looking down. My eyes were a little closed. The way eyes look when you face a bright screen in a dim room. Over my shoulder in the blur of my living room, the sliding door was open a few inches. It was open now, too. The photo had the wrong timestamp. It said 2:17 a.m. I set the phone down carefully, like a person setting down a cup of something very hot. I closed the door. I latched it, though I almost never latch it. I turned on the TV, volume low. The laugh track of a sitcom that had been comforting when I was a kid suddenly sounded misaligned, the laughter a half-second late. I turned it off. The room felt thick with paused things. I washed the rice bowl even though it didn't need washing. I dried it and put it back on the shelf. My hands wanted to do small chores. That night, the drip started at 2:17. By the time I sat up, I could tell it was inside the room, not outside, and not from any faucet. It was slow, irregular, like an old clock's uneven tuck. I stood and the pull-out frame creaked. I held my phone light low to the floor as if the sound were fragile. The sound wasn't on the floor. It was above me. I tilted the light up. The ceiling was plain white, a faint hairline crack running from the hallway toward the sliding door. In the center of that line, a damp spot had formed no bigger than a coin. It didn't spread. It wasn't a leak like a leak. It was a single bead inflated like a blister, glossy. I waited for it to drip, thinking I'd move a bowl, take a photo for the landlord, do something that would make this normal. It held. I sat there and watched water not fall. In the morning, the spot was gone. I would have thought I imagined it if not for the faint gray smudge on the carpet where a drop had either landed or threatened to. The smudge smelled like stone. Not a thing you can describe, only recognize. Cool, clean, the way statues smell if you get too close. Lena left a note on the counter, her handwriting small and even. Coffee with Jess, back by 3. Put basil on sill. She drew a little basil leaf beside it like a prayer. I wanted to tell her about the ceiling. I had the impulse to protect her from a thing I didn't understand by pretending it didn't exist. That's love's weakness. It thinks silence can be a shield. I drove to work. Halfway there, at a red light near Serramonte, my phone vibrated with a notification from Photos. Relive your visit. A slideshow had been generated with soft piano music, my favorite, it guessed. The first image was the statue, then the candles, then a photo I didn't take, a bench near the older section on the hill. On that bench sat the man with the silver hair and his boy, but they weren't how I remembered. The boy was tying his shoe again, and the man was looking down at him with an expression that hurt to see. Between them, on the wood slats, was a third shape. Not a person, not a clear form, but a darkening of air, as if someone had sat there and then left behind a shadow that had cooled slower than everything else. I pulled into a gas station and closed the app. I didn't delete anything. Deleting felt like saying a true thing, and I wasn't ready to announce my belief out loud even to a phone. At the gym, a cop came in, regular guy, walks the treadmill, talks about the Giants. He asked how I was. I said fine. He said, my aunt's buried out in Colma. Great grounds. Feels peaceful. He didn't pause like a storyteller. He reached for the towel stack and said, almost to himself, my cousin swears the statue out there helps people settle their minds. Says it makes you see what you're avoiding. I asked which statue. He looked puzzled, like he'd expected me to know. The Mary, he said, and wiped the console of the treadmill with slow circles as if the console also needed soothing. He ran a mile and left. When the door closed behind him, the lobby's quiet felt full, like a full water glass you must carry without spilling. I told Lena that night because the telling had become heavier than the keeping. We sat on the floor and I explained badly. Drips at 217, the photo album I didn't make, the slideshow. She listened the way she always listens, with her whole face. She said, okay, let's do this the right way. We'll go back. We'll take flowers. We'll say thank you for the visit and that we're going now. She said it like we were leaving an apartment after a party where we didn't know anyone. Be polite, that's a habit too. We went the following evening, earlier this time. The sky was a flat pale. The gatehouse light was off. Ortega's cart wasn't by the path. We walked the paved lane and our footsteps sounded like someone else walking in time. The statue's clearing was empty. The candles had cooled to glass. The rose from before had browned at the edges like toast. Lena set down a small bouquet from the grocery store, the kind with baby's breath. I whispered, thank you for letting us come before. We're going home now. It felt ridiculous leaving my mouth. I said it again anyway. Lena touched the pedestal with her fingertips and closed her eyes. Her lips moved. I didn't ask what she said. Her prayers are her own. We turned to go, then froze. A man was standing at the path entrance, hands in the pockets of a coat too thin for the mist. The silver at his temples shone. It was the man with the boy, but he was alone now. He nodded to us with the distracted politeness of grocery store aisles. He walked past, not looking at the statue, just at the ground ahead as if counting steps. We stepped aside. He stopped at the pedestal, took out his phone, and raised it. He took a photo. He took another. He didn't look at the screen. He slid the phone back into his pocket as if performing a ritual. He touched the base like a person leaning to tie a shoe and whispered something I didn't catch. His eyes were open. His mouth was barely moving. I heard one word, not English. Then, okay, in English, small as a child's. On the way out, we saw Ortega's cart parked by a hedge. He was kneeling, picking up something from the grass. "Wind knocked them," he said to no one in particular. He held up a broken votive glass. "Get sharp," he glanced at us. He paused like he'd been about to say something and thought better. Then he said it anyway because some people can't let others leave without one more kindness. "If you're hearing things," he said, "it might be the bees in the cypress. They buzz at odd hours. Sounds like dripping if you're inside." He looked embarrassed, like he knew how weak the explanation was, and offered it anyway like a coat when the rain's already soaked through. We went home. The house smelled like basil and damp towels. I put the new flowers on the table without thinking, and immediately moved them to the counter because flowers had begun to feel like invitations. At 2:17 a.m. I woke. No drip, I waited. The dark was full but not tight. I slept again. In the morning, the carpet spot was faint as if time had licked it away. I told Lena, and she nodded like she had expected a neat ending. She didn't say it, but I heard the thought. We were respectful, so it ended. That afternoon, I was cleaning the gym's back room when my phone buzzed with a location alert I had never set up. Significant locations, Colma. A little red pin. Date and timestamps that didn't match any day I recalled. I turned off the setting. I opened the camera to take a picture of a barbell someone had bent and left, intending to text it to my manager with a polite complaint. The lens didn't focus. The background swam. For a second, the overlay of my face and the black screen before the camera engages showed me the room behind me. The sliding door was open, but I wasn't home. I turned the phone over and used it like a dead weight in my hand until my heart slowed. I said nothing to anyone for a week. If you keep a secret long enough, it turns into furniture you forget you own. Life resumed its shape. We made pasta. We watched weather radars on the news and argued about whether the red blobs meant anything. Marco texted us videos of his cat's new habit of loosening the sink tap. Even Mrs. Chang's window was yellow again, and she resumed her laps, adding the small side-to-side tilt to her head that I later realized was her listening. And then last night, something changed in a way I can't iron flat with normal words. I was closing the sliding door, late, negligent, absent-minded, when my phone, which was charging on the counter, chimed 3 times short. Not a text, not an email. A sound I hadn't heard. The screen lit. Shared album request, Holy Cross. From an address that wasn't an address. No name. Just a gray circle with a silhouette like a chess pawn. I shouldn't have tapped it. But it was like a doorbell in the night. You go to it even as you tell yourself you shouldn't. The album opened. It contained only video, 1 clip. Length some row 8. The video begins with a shaky frame of the statue's pedestal. The camera angle is low, almost at shoe level, like a child holding it or a phone left on the ground and propped against something. You can hear wind through cypress in a whispery hiss, but underneath there's a ticking like a cooling car engine. The picture brightens, then darkens. You can see the toe of a sneaker. It's a small sneaker. The camera tilts up, a quick, clumsy tilt. And for a fraction of a second, the statue's face fills the frame. Too close, marble cheek and carved curl. So close you can see faint tool marks like frost. Then the camera falls back, an accidental drop, and the picture shows an edge of the base and a shadow crosses. Human-shaped but not, elongated and wrong for that time of day. In the sound, just before the clip ends, a voice whispers, "Okay." It's the same small okay I heard at the pedestal. And the voice that says it is not the man's or the boy's, not anyone I know. It is my sister's voice. I didn't wake her. I sat on the couch with the slider latched and watched that 8 seconds until the shapes blurry with tears came from somewhere inside my face. I told myself the voice was a coincidence, a common shape of an okay. I told myself the album request was a glitch. I told myself that if I go to the cemetery tomorrow in daylight and talk to a person in a uniform and ask them to show me camera footage, none of this will be there. But I also know what time it is as I write this. It's 2:10. The habit of the hour has trained my pulse to wait. The room has that weighted quiet. The basil leaves tilt toward nothing. Lena is asleep with the door cracked open. I can hear her breath, the small whistle she makes when she's on her side. Here's the part that makes me feel foolish even typing it. After I watched that video for the 5th time, the apartment creaked like it does when the building settles, except instead of the wood sighing down, there was the faintest upward shift, like a breath being taken in. And in that lifted moment, I smelled eucalyptus so sharply it moved behind my eyes. It wasn't the neighbor's planter. It wasn't a draft. It was a scent laid down in a place the way a hand is laid on a shoulder. I stood very still because stillness is how you take a photograph, and somehow it felt like the respectful way to receive a thing that had followed the thread of our careful sentences home. It's 2:17 now. The ceiling is white and dry. I am listening to nothing. I am telling myself that's what it is, nothing. But my phone just lit up without a sound. The screen shows my own camera app open to the front-facing lens. I didn't touch it. The little circle in the corner shows the last taken photo, a tiny square. I could tap it and enlarge it and see what it is. I could close the phone and put it face down and let habit save me. I could wake Lena and sit on the kitchen floor with the basil between us and not look together. I am writing instead because there's a superstition in me now that says, if I keep stacking words in front of my eyes, the shape on the other side won't reach through. I know this is not a clean ending. I know you want me to say I learned a lesson, and the app stopped and the hour passed and the statue stayed in its place with the bees. I want that. But as I type this last sentence, I can see in the reflection of the sliding door my own shape, and behind it nothing but the dark yard and the suggestion of trees. And in that glass my face is just a shade, and the tiny square on my phone is bright, too bright, and I can't tell if the shine in the corner of that small image is my room light or a curved glint on marble waiting to fall. I never planned to type this out, but the sound followed me into my apartment last week and I realized I'm not going to sleep until I get it off my chest. I know these posts always say believe me or don't, so I'll get that out of the way too. It won't change what keeps waking me up at 2:17 a.m., the exact minute we stood outside a locked mausoleum and heard something that shouldn't be possible humming through stone. Grew up a mile from Evergreen Cemetery in East L.A. My mom used to take my sister Rosa and me past the brick walls on Sunday evenings when it was still hot and the jacaranda blossoms stuck to our shoes. The place is old, older than most of the city, and it doesn't try to hide it. Names carved shallow, dates worn smooth. A low wall runs along Evergreen Avenue with a fence that's more suggestion than barrier. I've known the rumors since middle school. Blue lights in the mausoleums after midnight. A caretaker in the 70s who heard a piano floating through the chill air. Keys warm to the touch in the morning, though the instrument had been broken longer than he'd been alive. Teenagers talk about skeletal hands tapping the glass, which I always filed under things kids say when they want an excuse to bail before the cops show up. Rosa believed, or said she did, which is the same thing when you're sitting on a porch in the warm dark, listening to helicopters somewhere south and the buzzing of a streetlight that never quite shuts off. Our friend Devin didn't believe at all. He works nights at a taco truck on Soto and counts tips as a cure for superstition. Blue lights are just someone's busted solar garden lamps, he said once, and I wanted that to be true. But curiosity is like a pebble in your shoe. You can ignore it for a few blocks. On the third block, you have to stop. Mr. Alvarez was the reason we went back after we were supposed to have outgrown this stuff. He lived across from the cemetery in a one-story house with peeling paint, behind a fence that always had 2 plastic chairs set up facing the street like a theater. He'd been a groundskeeper at Evergreen until his knees gave out. He saw us enough times walking past that we eventually ended up talking. First about the heat and where to get the cheapest mangoes, then about the funerals, the families, how people grieve differently and in exactly the same ways. He had a voice like a gravel driveway and he never rushed his stories. The day he mentioned the piano made the hair on my arm stand up. Back in 70-something, he said, gesturing with his cigarette like it was a conductor's baton. There's this whisper at the gate. Nightman says he hears notes, soft like a radio in the next room. He goes looking, and he swears it comes from one of the old private mausoleums by the northwest corner. Lights were blue inside. Locked, of course. Morning, they open it. There's a piano. Broken since God knows when. Keys warm, he says. Warm like you stepped away for a minute. He took a drag and didn't look at us. I didn't make that up. Maybe the sun, Devin said without any conviction. Evergreen's big trees throw shadows that make afternoons feel like basements. Sun warming anything in there didn't track. Blue lights? Rosa asked. Electric? Electric wasn't run to those. Not back then. Mr. Alvarez flicked ash into a coffee can and added almost like he regretted it. Sometimes the light's outside, not in, like it slips through the stone. You think you're seeing a reflection and then it moves without your say-so. If you've lived in LA long enough, you'll know that quiet is a rare commodity, and it usually means you should keep your ears open. The night we went, a Monday, the sky over downtown had that faint orange smear it always has when there are just enough clouds to throw back the city's glow. It had been 98 during the day. At 11 p.m., the concrete was still radiating heat through the soles of my shoes. We came with flashlights we barely turned on, a thermos of coffee that tasted like mud, and that uneasy combination of hope and dread you get when you're about to test a story against the world. On the sidewalk, a woman in a Dodgers cap walked a dog that kept trying to sniff the gate. She wished us a good night without looking up. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train wailed, then kept wailing long after it went out of sight. There's always a siren in LA if you wait long enough. Several passed on First Street with the kind of urgency that makes your stomach clamp down for no clear reason. A breeze pushed the pepper tree leaves against the fence. Simple, normal things. I list them because I want to be clear that nothing theatrical was happening. No sudden cold. No shadow that had too many edges. We took the side path along Evergreen Avenue that curves to a cluster of private mausoleums built at a time when people thought forever should have a roof. The marble there is gray and tired looking, and the little windows set into the doors have wavy glass that makes any movement look like it's underwater. No flowers at that hour. No caretakers. Just the three of us and the fence in the sense that we were stepping into a long, slow breath. Rosa reached through the fence to tap the padlock with her finger. The metal was scabbed with rust but solid. "If there are lights in there, we'll see them without going in," she said. Our deal was to stay outside. Devin's truck was parked legally. We had a clear path back to the sidewalk, and we weren't going to mess with anything. "Look, that one." She pointed to a mausoleum with an etched glass door and a name spelled out over it in a font that made me think of old movie theaters. The window looked darker than the others, like a TV in sleep mode. We waited. At midnight, a Prius rolled by so slow I could see the driver's face lit blue by his GPS. He didn't look at us. A mosquito found the crook of my elbow and went in for a long drink. I swatted and missed. Devin kept shifting his weight, then stopped when we shushed him. I lifted the thermos, then put it down without drinking. Not out of any superstition. My mouth was too dry. We waited more cars. Another siren, this time receding. A plane-stitch sound across the sky. My neck started to stiffen. I told myself Mr. Alvarez's story was a story. At 12:43, the blue light appeared in the mausoleum Rosa had pointed out. It wasn't dramatic. It was like someone put a TV behind a closed door and just turned it on. The light had that tint, too cool for fire, too smooth to be a flashlight. It pulled inside the glass in a way I can only describe as patient. We all leaned forward without meaning to. Devin whispered, "What the hell?" And Rosa shushed him again, but her voice came out clipped like her breath was catching on something. I'm practical. I noticed the angle first. The window's wavy glass takes any reflection and kneads it into a mess. But this was contained. When a car rolled by, its headlights made scratches and flares on the marble. The blue was unaffected. It didn't pick up the headlights, didn't flicker. I got close enough to fog the outer bars with my breath and put my eyes level with the glass. Behind it, I thought I could make out the curve of a lid, something like the edge of a wooden box. Tucked farther back, the suggestion of a music stand. That's when I realized how hard my heart was hitting my ribs. Could be a phone someone left in there, Devin said. He wanted to be helpful and logical, even though a phone in a locked mausoleum at midnight is not logical at all. He took out his own and held it up, shining the screen glow at the glass. The blue didn't notice or care. I saw the reflection of his hands shake, and I think we both pretended we didn't. We heard the piano at 12:49. I know the time because I checked my watch right before, irritated with the way my knees ached from standing. The notes were soft and simple, not a melody I recognized, more like the way you press each key to see if it still works. A cluster of 3 descending, then one held down longer than the rest, like someone was thinking. A pause. A couple of notes in the upper range, so light they were almost nothing. Silence for 5 breaths. Then the same 3 notes lower. Then a tentative chord, as if whoever was inside there realized, that key still sounds, and wanted to hear it again. No flourish. No cinematic song. Just someone learning a room. Rosa covered her mouth and looked at me over her fingers. Devin stepped back so fast his heel hit something and his flashlight jerked. He swore under his breath, then steadied himself. "Someone's in there," he said, voice thin. And it was both the obvious thing to say and a terrifying one because of the lock right in front of us, because of the dust webs in the corners of the door, because of the little brass placard with a death date so old it felt like part of a different grid of time. The light shifted, not brighter or dimmer, but it seemed to lean toward us even though nobody moved. The notes stopped like they were startled. We didn't say anything for a few seconds. Somewhere behind us, a skateboard clacked against pavement and a kid laughed. Far away and ordinary. Across the street, a porch light clicked on, then off. Then there was a sound like a fingertip against glass. 1, 2, 3 taps. Nothing showy. The kind of tap you make when you aren't sure your friend is listening. "What do we do?" Rosa whispered. There's never a reasonable answer to that question at a cemetery at midnight. I said, "Hello?" before I could think better of it, because I'm the sort of person who will pick up a ringing phone even if I don't recognize the number. My voice sounded wrong to me, big in the air. Is someone in there? And then, because logic still ninjas into your brain even when you're staring at something impossible, do you need help? No answer. If it had spoken, I think we would have sprinted. The blue light softened like it had taken a breath. Another 3 notes, the same cluster, and I had the sudden, terrible sense that it was answering. Just not in a language made of words. The side gate screeched open down the path and a flashlight beam speared the night. Bright and official. "Hey!" a voice barked, and my body did that thing where it wants to be 10 years old and running, but my feet were too slow to get the message. Rosa gripped my wrist. Devin put his hands up like he was on a TV cop show. The beam found us and settled into that simple rectangle of us, guilty of being where we shouldn't. And I felt relief rush through the fear so hard it almost knocked me off balance. It was a real security guard, not a legend. He had a patched shirt, a mag light, the tired authority of someone who repeats the same sentences to different idiots all the time. He asked for IDs we didn't have to show and told us we were trespassing even though we were still on the sidewalk side of the fence. "You need to keep it moving," he said, like the city itself does when people try to stop and ask too many questions. Devin apologized. Rosa apologized. I found myself talking about Mr. Alvarez and the piano, and the blue light like a man selling a product I didn't believe in. And the guard looked at me, then at the dark mausoleum, and his expression did a very strange thing. "You heard the piano?" he asked in a voice that was suddenly quieter, his flashlight dropping a degree. That seemed more dangerous than shouting. Maybe, Rosa said, immediately unsure of herself now that someone in uniform asked. The guard lifted his light and flicked it at the glass. The blue was gone, or it had decided to pretend it was gone. "Y'all should go home," he said. But there was something that had changed in him. Not fear, not exactly. He took out his radio and clicked it twice like he was thinking of saying something else. Then didn't. "Tonight's not the night," he added. And I wanted to ask what night would be, but we were already being ushered away. A firm hand not touching my elbow, but almost. Back on Evergreen Avenue, the guard kept an eye on us as we got in Devin's truck. The first thing you do when you leave somewhere you weren't supposed to be is laugh, even if your laugh sounds like it's wearing someone else's clothes. Devin started the engine and it made that struggling sound all older trucks make, hoping it'll be enough. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, just a blank speech bubble. I assumed spam or a glitch until later. We dropped Rosa at Mom's and I watched her go inside, switch on the kitchen light, wave, switch it off. The normalcy cleared a knot I hadn't realized was there. Devin drove me to my place on Folsom. We talked about the Dodgers because that's what you do when you don't want to talk about anything real. He said it was probably a reflection off something weird. I said the piano probably had some metal part that resonates in wind. We were building a safe place to stand. We shook hands like people who had just left a weird party and promised to text tomorrow. We did in fact text. We sent a stupid amount of baseball emojis. We pretended. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. to a single piano note. If you've ever had a noise in your house you couldn't place, a pipe clank, a refrigerator shutter, you know the feeling of lying very still and trying to make your heart beat quietly so your ears work. I live in a 2-room place. You can see the couch from the bed. My neighbor's TV sometimes bleeds through the wall. She likes true crime, but this was front and center. It was not a song. It was one press of a key, then air, then another soft press 4 breaths later. Not as decisive as the first, like someone testing a tooth that hurts and then learning. I got up. I don't know why I didn't turn on a light. I stood barefoot on the cold spot in the kitchen tile that always stays cold because something under there never warms up. My throat felt gritty. I breathed carefully because I was afraid of missing the next note. It came higher this time, then a low one. I put my hand on the counter and realized how odd it was to be standing in the dark counting breaths between sounds. I also realized my phone on the table was face down and vibrating gently once every minute, humming like a bee. A minute? 2:18. I touched the screen. No notification. That blank text from earlier was still at the top of my messages. A bubble with no sender info, no content, just a timestamp, 12:50 a.m. I hadn't noticed it when we were still outside the cemetery, but I noticed then that the time was exactly the minute the first notes had started. I opened it and there was nothing to open. I tried calling back, but there was nothing to call back to. The little blue circle spun like an eye rolling. I live with old noises. Plumbing from the Eisenhower era dominoes through the building at weird hours. But the piano note was different because a piano isn't in the walls. You don't expect an instrument in an empty room unless someone puts it there. I stepped into the living room and stood there like an idiot expecting an upright to be leaning against the coat rack. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, not for any noble reason, but because each time I closed my eyes I heard that soft sound again, and the space between notes felt like someone leaning close enough to fog the window if I had one. By morning, the logical part of my brain was marching around with a clipboard. "You're primed," it said. "You were at a graveyard. You let a story climb onto your back." It's easy to believe the clipboard voice in daylight. I called Mr. Alvarez, and he picked up on the third ring with an elaborate hello like he'd been expecting a telemarketer, and was disappointed to get me. When I told him what happened, he got quiet. People in LA get quiet for different reasons. Waiting for the bus, for their food, for an apology. This quiet felt like he was peering across a street in his head and trying to see who was standing there. "Don't go alone," he said finally. "Not again. Go in the morning." "The gates are open during the day," I said, grateful for the practical fact to hold on to. "We'll do it right. No trespassing." "Morning," he repeated. "You hear me?" "Morning." He'd only had a cigarette when I talked to him before, but I could hear the scratch in his throat like he'd been smoking a smaller, sharper thing. "I'm not saying you should. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm saying if you do." "Morning." We went the next day at 10 a.m., when old men with newsprint on their fingers ride bikes along the paths and families in Sunday clothes talk around headstones in voices that don't quite match. The northwest corner looks different in the sun. Everything reveals its dust. The mausoleum windows just looked like wavy glass. No light, no hum, no excuse for fear. Rosa brought a bouquet she picked up from the guy who sells them outside the drugstore and left it by the gate because she said you don't go into somebody's place empty-handed. Devin found the security guard from the night before leaning against a maintenance shed. Sipping something from a can he set down quickly when we approached. We apologized for being a nuisance. He accepted like he was tired of having the power to accept things. "You said tonight's not the night," I told him. "What does that mean?" "It means you weren't the first and I didn't feel like paperwork," he said. Then he surprised me by walking with us, not all the way, but close enough that when we stopped by the mausoleum door, he stopped too and looked over our shoulders as if he didn't want to be seen wanting to look. In daylight, the music stand looked like a trick of the glass. But behind the waviness, I traced the edge of what could only be a piano. Not a grand with its swagger, but an upright, the kind you find in churches and school gyms. The wood was warped. The keys showed a row of yellowed smudges like long-ago fingerprints. I wanted to call it imagination, but Devin saw it at the same time and said very softly, "Huh." Rosa pulled her sleeve over her hand and touched the window. "Cold," she said, and then after a second she said, "No, actually," and pulled back as if it was rude to linger. I put my palm where hers had been. The glass accepted it like it was always meant to be there. I've held plenty of cold glass in my life. This had I don't want to say warmth because it sounds like a punchline. It felt like someone had been leaning there from the other side for a long time and had just stepped away. Keys would be warm if anyone had played it, I heard myself say, and my voice sounded like I was trying it on. Devin nodded, glad for the science of it even if the facts weren't cooperating. The guard looked down at his shoes. "Guy I trained with," he said after a moment so quiet I almost missed it. Said once he put his ear to the door and heard somebody practicing scales like a kid. He came back the next morning with the maintenance key because he couldn't stand not knowing, and when he went in, the whole room smelled like old roses and the wood on the bench was warm like someone just got up to get a drink. He glanced at us like he'd said too much. I didn't make that up either. We didn't have a key, and even if the guard had one, he wasn't going to risk his job or our sanity handing it over. Morning is best, he said when he left us. I don't know why. It just is. Hearing him say what Mr. Alvarez had said landed differently. They hadn't rehearsed, we stayed a while. We didn't see any blue light. We didn't hear music. A kid rode by and the wheels of his bike made that whirring sound of plastic cards clipped to the spokes. Rosa left her bouquet by a marker and rested her forehead briefly on the cold metal of the fence like she was listening for something on the other side. Life submerges weird things quickly. The next few days were work and a busted air conditioner and a neighbor's birthday party that went past a polite hour. When I remembered the cemetery, I remembered it like an old dream that makes you want more coffee. Then on Friday, a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize popped up. When I played it, it was 5 seconds of nothing, and then a single piano note so soft it might have been my room adjusting to the night. The timestamp said 2:17 a.m. I walked over to Mr. Alvarez's the next afternoon. He wasn't on the porch. His 2 plastic chairs were empty, one tilted like it had been shifted by a knee. The dog walker woman from before was back, the dog different this time. "You looking for Mr. Alvarez?" she asked when she saw me hesitating by the fence. "Ambulance took him 2 nights ago. Heart. His niece came by and got his radio." She said it like she was saying somebody moved out of a rental. The city encourages you to keep your emotions mobile. I tried the hospital and hit a wall of polite privacy that was either good news or bad. I sat on his steps until the sun angled to make the concrete heat up and my thighs complain. I told myself that if he came out, I'd ask him to tell me again about the night man. The blew the keys this time with more dates, more facts, like facts would be a rope in my hands. I didn't sleep that night. No surprise, and at 2:17 I didn't even jump at the sound. The notes came the same way as before, spaced like someone pacing a small room. I lay still and counted. On the 4th note, my phone vibrated. When I flipped it over, the same blank speech bubble was there with a new timestamp and a dot that winked and then vanished like someone had typed a letter and then deleted it. I sent a text back, a ridiculous thing to do, to nobody. "Who are you?" The dot did not come back. I got up and went to the kitchen. I don't own a piano, obviously, but I opened a piano app I hadn't touched since Rosa tried to learn a song during the pandemic. The app maps the keys to your screen. When you press one, it glows. I was going to match the notes I'd heard, because in the face of something I can't grasp, I'd try to turn it into a pattern I can draw. Before I touched anything, my phone vibrated again. The app's keyboard flashed 3 dull lights, down, 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 and a single high key blinked like a wink. No sound, just the visual, like someone who can't speak was pointing. I want to say I made the chosen notes myself to feel better. It's easier to live with a stupid thing you did than with a thing the world did to you. I pressed the keys. My screen lit where my fingers were, nothing else. The room held its breath. A neighbor coughed far away. Ever since, if I swipe past the app, even by accident, the same 3 keys flash and that one high one blinks once like it's checking if I'm paying attention. Rosa asked me to stop messing with it, because she believes on principle that if you open a door, something walks in. Devin wants me to get a new phone. He showed me a thread where someone's smart TV kept switching to a weather channel in the middle of the night and blamed it on radio interference. He offered to trade phones for a week as an experiment. We did it. At 2:17 a.m., his phone lit up on my table and mine lit up on his nightstand across town. He texted me just a question mark. I replied with a dash because I couldn't bring myself to type out what it was. The next morning, he returned my phone and said nothing, which is a different kind of belief. We went back to Evergreen one more time in the morning like we'd been told. The air was heavy with a tar-like smell from a paving crew on the next block. The jacarandas had dropped purple like a nice party someone forgot to clean up. The same mausoleum looked like it had looked, tired glass carved name that made me think of an old theater. Inside, the upright waited. Rosa didn't touch the window this time. She stood with her hands in her pockets and the sun in her hair and looked tired in a way the sun didn't fix. A man in a dark suit walked by with a folder held like a shield. A pair of groundskeepers pulled weeds with the world's gentlest patience. If you wanted, you could convince yourself this was just a bench on a sidewalk. But when a breeze pushed across the path, it carried a smell that made me think of rooms with flowers left too long. That sweet and sour note of petals that have decided to be something else. A woman our mom knows from the market recognized Rosa and came over to say hello. She said she'd heard about Mr. Alvarez from her cousin, and they both shook their heads in that slow way that says the city takes, and you nod. She asked what we were doing, and when Rosa started to say something about a story, the woman interrupted with, "The lights? Oh, my brother says those are kids. You know, TikTok," then she added, "but he doesn't go near them either." She laughed, then didn't. We stood there until my mind got tired of holding two pictures at once, the rational city and the other one that exists underneath it like an original sketch forgotten behind the final drawing. I put my palm against the glass and felt nothing but a faint human heat that could have been my own reflected back a second later. Devin reached over my shoulder with his phone and snapped a quick photo at such an angle. The light caught the dust inside and turned it into stars. We looked at the photo on the sidewalk. The smudges on the keys were just smudges. Behind them, though, in the reflection, something lined up that made my breath shave a fine line through my chest. The faintest suggestion of fingers where my hand had been. Blurred the way all reflections blur, not distinct, not proof. Just enough to make you doubt your own spine. I didn't keep the photo. That's going to sound like a cop-out. It was an instinct, like not touching a hot pan. I told myself the file would eat memory, and I'm always running out of memory. But really, it's because evidence pins you down while suggestion keeps you awake. The city is full of things that happened in a way that cannot be told neatly. Sometimes that means sirens. Sometimes it means if you walk past a fence in the right hour and ask the air a question, it answers in a language that uses the spaces between sounds. When I got home that night, I set my phone face down and put the piano app in a folder I labeled Utilities, like it was a screwdriver I didn't want to throw away. At 2:17 a.m., my phone vibrated anyway. I sat up and waited. The notes didn't come. The room ticked and settled. A car door clacked somewhere on the street. Finally, because I couldn't leave it alone, I got up and pushed my palm against my window. The glass felt cool. Then after a second, warm, but the kind of warmth you could swear was your own hand reflected back at you. I don't walk past Evergreen at night anymore. That sounds like a resolution. It isn't. Last evening, I sat on my porch with Rosa and watched the heat make the sky over downtown wobble. A helicopter shuffled along lazily. A neighbor watered a square of lawn like a page he was trying to erase. Devin texted a photo of a cat sleeping in a pizza box, and the pizza box was empty, and the cat looked like it owned the place. The city does what it always does, which is keep going. That should be the end. This is the part where the story pulls itself closed and I tell you we learned something, which would be a lie. I was getting ready for bed when the blank speech bubble chimed again. I expected the timestamp, the non-message. There was neither. Just the bubble. And for a second it had that faint glow like the inside of a wavy glass window when a light turns on behind it. In the silence after, my apartment felt like a room on the other side of a door. I held my breath and waited for the taps, nothing. Then, very softly, the 3 notes I could draw with my eyes closed now. The 4th one held a heartbeat longer than I remembered. Like whoever was pressing wanted to be sure. If you take nothing else from this, take this. Not everything is out to frighten you. Not everything is out to comfort you either. Some things just are. And they will go on being. And if you stand in the right place, you will overlap for a minute. Maybe that minute is all there is. Maybe it's more. Mr. Alvarez might tell you if he were on his porch with his cigarette that some rooms are heavier in the dark because history has a weight. The piano keys, if they were warm for a reason that doesn't care if we have a name for it. I still hear it sometimes, not every night. And I try very hard not to count the breaths between the notes, even though I always do. I try not to check the clock when it wakes me up. And sometimes I lie and tell myself it says something other than 2:17. I keep my hand off the glass. Most of the time, but some nights I find it there without knowing how it got there. Fingers splayed like I'm matching them to someone else's, through something that's meant to keep us apart. And when the blue from my phone screen catches that thin reflection and makes it look like light is coming from somewhere it shouldn't, I don't find the app. I don't press anything. I listen. I know better than to say I'm the only one who does. There are teenagers who sneak in, neighbors who walk their dogs, a night guard who pretends not to look. Someone is on the other side of the glass practicing the simplest music in the world. And maybe it's just the sound of a city learning to say its name in the dark. Or maybe it's a hand I can almost see, tapping 3 times, patient as stone, waiting to hear if the answer is still there.